Wow, what a great way to start Sync Summit 2024.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to ITHRA. I'm Mohammed Islam.
And I am Ghadir Al-Shahri.
And I'm Ollie Barrett, and between us, we are honored to be your hosts for Sync Summit 2024. Over the next couple of days, we're going to be exploring everything to do with digital well-being and really considering how we might all reset our relationship with technology so that we can look towards a happier and much healthier future.
And of course, don't forget and make sure that you download the event app. Search for Sync Summit 2024, and that's on the App Store and Play Store. And also, don't forget to check out the Sync K-Hub interactive installation, which is located outside in the plaza.
Yeah. Should we kick off?
Yeah?
Well, and now to officially open the summit, I'd like to introduce the director of King Abdulaziz Center for World Heritage, ITHRA, Mr. Abdullah Al-Rashid.
Thank you.
Hello, Abdullah. كيف حالك؟
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh jami'an. A few weeks ago, I got a free coupon for a cleaning service. You know, those hourly cleaning services that come at home and they assist you. This was something I'd heard a lot of people had used. You know, it makes their lives better. It gives them time to do the things that matter in life. They get to engage with loved ones. They get to go out. I mean, it was free, so I decided to try it. I picked up the coupon and I called the number. They sent a young lady, her name was Lucy, that came over to the house. She quickly got very accustomed to the house. She started cleaning and getting things ready. This made my life better. You know, I had more time to do the things that I wanted. I mean, eventually, really, to be really honest with you guys, I eventually didn't go out as much. I ended up just watching a lot of Netflix and screen time. But in the end, my house was clean. Everything was organized. If I needed something when I was out of the house, I could call, and she would answer. And then one day, something a bit weird happened. I had lost my watch. I knew that it was in the house, but I didn't know where it was. So I thought I'd ask her, and she answered with a response that was a bit worrying, because she knew things that she shouldn't have known. She told me, well, it's inside your jewelry box in your room, in your locked drawer. Well, that's not an area that she has access to, but apparently she did. And then one day she had left her phone, and I accidentally had tapped the screen, and she had a photo of my children on her phone. So I decided that this was too weird. I'm going to call the authorities, right? This is clearly somebody who's snooping inside the house. So I called the authorities and tell me, well, we have extreme rules against this. This is not acceptable, but this is happening in your house. We can't control it, right? So it's up to you and her to figure it out. Honestly, I thought about canceling the service, but life was too good. So I decided to accept it and just live with it. Now she watches me when I sleep, monitors my heart rate, makes sure I'm okay. Sometimes even in the bathroom, you know, why not? While there. The story I share with you that seems very absurd is the reality we live in, right? That's how we've allowed access and accepted technology in our lives today. And it's not fictional. For a toaster to be accepted and go to market, there are like extreme engineering regulations and safety regulations. The size of the cable, the fuse, you know, the heat that it can dissipate, etc. All of that to make sure that it's safe and easy to use for everybody. But a VR headset that can rewire your brain, change your perception of reality, doesn't go through that rigor. We are more concerned about burnt toast than our brains. Our kids are more comfortable becoming performers in front of thousands of people on a screen than they are chatting one-to-one to somebody in a room. Now, some of you might say, we've heard all of this before, it's over-concern, it's hyperbola, it's the apocalypse now narrative. But I want to tell you why I think it's really important to have this discussion today. There are 15 billion phones around the world and 7 billion people. Our research, which is the largest in the world in 30 countries, spanning East and West, shows that in many countries, when people were asked about how they feel about technology, the split is almost exactly 50-50. So we are at the tipping point. One of the most remarkable, I think, paradoxes for me is that 71% of people think that AI is great, yet also 71% of people think that there should be a pause on the development of AI. So we want it, but we're not really sure what to do with it. And we've seen the implications of these trends over the past few years, and that's why this platform is so important. We sleep less than ever before. We have less friends than ever before. We spend less time with our families than ever before. We have more depression, more suicide, all correlated with this prevalation of technology into our lives. The second trend that that makes this really important to discuss today as well is that it seems irreversible. You know, at COVID, as a result of COVID, our screen time went up by 2 hours on average globally. You would think that if, I don't know, I spent 30 years living my life in a certain way, and then a few months of COVID, my screen time goes up. As soon as COVID goes away, I should go back to where I was, because that was the practice for 30 years or 40 years, or whatever it was. Our average continues to be up by at least an hour. So we've dropped a little bit, but not much. It seems that the results and the impacts of technology and its use on us is irreversible. And then the third final trend is one from the technology developers themselves. We've seen over the last few months so many of these tech developers, leaders, C-suite, come out, leave their companies, and whistleblow. They're the creators of this technology that are raising the warning. I'm not aware of any other industry that is shouting out to be regulated by itself. I mean, most recently, we have Jeffrey Hinton, who's the godfather of AI, leaving Google and speaking about this and how he thinks that the doomsday or the super AI will come in much sooner than before. And maybe just a couple of days ago, the Scarlett Johansson OpenAI narrative that's happening over the last couple of days. So this is really important, but also very timely. I don't want to sound like I'm anti-tech. This would not have been possible whether or not for technology. I use technology. We at Sync are not technology regulators or technology oppressors, but we have a very simple mantra. We're humanity upholders. We want to think with people first, technology second, rather than the other way around. And that's really the bedrock of the next couple of days of the summit. We've tried to design this with our partners, our board, and everybody here that's involved to really bring those conversations to life, have meaningful outcomes. Yesterday, there was a scientific closed gathering for over 50 top scientists from around the world that we're here discussing a pathway forward for all of this, because we think that humanity should come first. And I'm sure that you'll find it enriching, shocking, but hopefully also drive us all to collective action towards a unified way forward. And I want to end with one note. Over the next 2 days, you're going to hear from psychologists, pediatrics, management professionals, teachers, lawyers, everybody from every spectrum. It's no longer a discussion for the IT specialists. Today, we are all technologists. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Abdullah. We are all technologists. Well, if that isn't an invitation to lean in to the next 2 days, then we don't know what is. Such a personal set of provocations there and reflections as well, which sets us up perfectly for our inaugural summit session here, where we're going to really try to delve deep into the heart of what we're calling this digital paradox, a world of potential contradictions. I'm going to introduce to the stage some outstanding individuals, and some of them, their reputations, and all of them, in fact, their reputations precede them, because they have been profoundly shaping and shaped by the technology around us. We're in good hands because at the helm is interviewer and serial entrepreneur Anas Bukash, and he's going to be joined on stage, firstly, by Kristin Bride. Now, Kristin, is many things. She's a parent, she is a survivor, she is a social media reform addict, and honored guests, we will hear why. Because her activism in the wake of her son Carson's death by suicide as a result of cyberbullying is driving incredibly important and critical dialogue at both a public and a policy level across the US and further afield on the importance of online harm prevention. So Abdullah really has set the scene. These topics are are challenging, to say the least. I'm also delighted that we're going to be joined with Anas and Kristin on stage by a true Silicon Valley icon, a philanthropist, an entrepreneurial legend. I'm speaking, of course, about the one and only Steve Wozniak. Steve, who in the 1970s, with Steve Jobs, co-founded Apple and has gone on to inspire innovation and champion education and technological innovation all around the world. And he has always, as you will hear, kept a critical eye on the changing face and the global influence of the global tech industry. So fascinating to hear his latest concerns, reflections, and ideas. Now, before this trio join us on stage, we're going to share just a very short film to show a little bit more context on what this conversation is really all about.
An important story for parents and kids now in our national league. Kristin Bride, she's one of the parents who went to Capitol Hill today to urge lawmakers to try to hold social media companies accountable.
I am testifying here today to bring a face to the harms occurring every day resulting from the unchecked power of the social media industry. The last search on his phone before Carson ended his life was for hacks to find out the identities of his abusers. These are not coincidences, accidents, or unforeseen consequences. They are the direct result of products designed to hook and monetize America's children.
Let's test this first. Where's the mic? Okay, hi. صباح الخير. قومتونا الصبح اليوم. Okay, welcome. It's lovely to have you both. Before we get into it, we have a very shocking and interesting topic we're discussing today, and we want to try to tackle it from different angles. I'm not going to stay too long, but it's a very good paradox to talk about. The pros, the cons of social media, its effect on our children, on us. I want to start with Kristin. You have a few things you wanted to start with,
Yes.
some slides.
Yes.
So please go ahead.
Okay. Do I have my first slide? Okay, here we go. So I would like to start by saying what an honor it is to be here today to share my son Carson's story as well as my journey from incredible grief to advocacy work. Next month will mark 4 years since the very worst day of my life. My son Carson, with the beautiful blue-green eyes, an amazing smile, great sense of humor, had just finished his sophomore year in high school. We encouraged him to get his first summer job, and he worked hard to get one, making pizzas. He came home from work that night happy and wrote his upcoming work schedule on our kitchen calendar. We celebrated him. We told him how proud we were of what he had accomplished. And in so many ways, our family was looking forward to an amazing summer. But that all ended the next morning. I woke up early to do some work on my computer. I looked down at my phone, and I saw that there was a text message from Carson regarding a suicide. I went running through the house, and I found that my son had hung himself in our garage while we slept. There are no words to describe the trauma that our family endured that morning, and it's something that never goes away. It's something that you live with for the rest of your lives. And so our first question was why? What had gone so terribly wrong overnight? We learned fairly quickly that Carson had been viciously cyberbullied by his high school Snapchat friends who were using anonymous apps to hide their identities. As parents, we were conservative with technology. We waited until Carson was through middle school to give him his first iPhone, a very old version with no apps on it. But by the time he got to high school, he was begging for Snapchat because that was the way all the kids were connecting. As parents, what we didn't know is that Snapchat had allowed anonymous apps onto the back end of their product. And anonymous apps, when marketed to teens, always lead to cyberbullying, usually a suicide. They get shut down, and then new ones come to market. So we looked into his phone even more, and we found that in the 2 weeks leading up to his suicide, he had received over 100 negative, harassing, sexually explicit, and humiliating messages from his high school Snapchat friends. He reached out to them, and he tried to handle this on his own, which many teens do. He reached out to his abusers and said, please swipe up and identify yourself. Clearly you have a problem with me. I'd like to talk things out in person. So here is my son trying to reclaim humanity in a digital world that was literally crushing him. No one ever did reveal their identity, and that's why in my testimony I say that the last search on his phone was for hacks to find out who was doing this to him. And when we look at what YOLO, the anonymous app on Snapchat, presented, it said that they had no tolerance for cyberbullying and that they would reveal the names of those who do so and ban them from the app. So after Carson's death, I reached out to YOLO. I needed to know who did this to my son, and I needed to know that they were banned from the app so they would not do it to any other kids. I was ignored all 4 times. And it was really at this point that I had a decision to make. Do I lay in bed and cry about this and just accept this, or do I begin to fight back? And I chose the latter, and I have not regretted it. Thank you. So I didn't know where to turn. This was 4 years ago, and many of these stories were not out there. And so I turned to the Center for Humane Technology after watching The Social Dilemma, and they were an amazing support for me. They provided me with resources and connections, and they allowed me opportunities to share Carson's story. And through that, I was able to connect with a law firm who informed me that YOLO would never respond to me, that I needed to file a lawsuit in order to make them respond. And so nearly a year after Carson's death, I filed a national class action lawsuit against Snapchat, YOLO, and LMK. Within 2 days, Snapchat had banned these 2 anonymous apps off of their platform. And then within 6 months, they made policy changes stating that they would not have anonymous features on Snapchat because they could not mitigate the risks at an acceptable level. I was happy that these apps could not harm other kids, but also saddened by the fact that it took my son dying and me filing a lawsuit to make them finally take the apps off of Snapchat. So the second part of my journey was finding my community. I knew that there were other parents out there who had experienced similar harms, and I needed to talk to them. So I co-founded the online harms prevention work group through Fair Play for Kids, a Boston nonprofit. Our group has grown significantly over the last 3 years. We have digital wellness professionals, we have teachers, we have concerned parents, and our largest part of our group are parents who have lost their kids to online harms. So in addition to suicides because of cyberbullying, we have parents who have lost their kids to suicide because of sextortion, dangerous online challenges like the choking challenge, and fentanyl-laced drugs that can be marketed, purchased, and delivered over Snapchat. So what do we do to change the trajectory of these harms? I'm just going to take a brief. Many of us, parent survivors and other groups of younger people, are advocating for the Kids Online Safety Act, which is federal legislation. It was introduced over 2 years ago by Senator Blackburn and Blumenthal. And it now has 70 bipartisan co-sponsors in the Senate. The Kids Online Safety Act would do many things, but most importantly, it would require these companies to have a duty of care when they're creating these products for our children. In very specific areas, they need to prevent and mitigate cyberbullying. Carson's death was clearly preventable. These companies knew that anonymous apps when marketed to teens always leads to cyberbullying and usually a suicide. But also, we take objection to the feeding of harmful material to our children through the algorithms. These are not what kids are looking up, it's what is being fed to them. And it's in 4 specific areas: pro-suicide content, pro-eating disorder content, sexual exploitation, and pro-substance abuse content. We have families who kids have looked up inspirational quotes when a girlfriend broke up with them, and they get fed pro-suicide content. We have other families. Their child looked up simply a healthy recipe, and then in their For You feed is pro-anorexia content. This, I think we can all agree, is not what we want fed to our children. This was on the front pages of many newspapers around the country and maybe around the world. We have had 10 congressional CEO hearings of big tech. This was the 10th. It was at January 31st of this year, but what was different about it is that there were parents in the audience, including myself, with pictures of our children who had died on social media. This was the moment where Senator Hawley really forced Mark Zuckerberg to turn around and look at us and apologize. But that apology felt very, very empty because we know that Meta has spent so much money, $7.5 million in just the first quarter of this year, lobbying against the Kids Online Safety Act. They continue to choose profit over people, and those people are our children. And this is what we're up against when we advocate in DC, is the big tech lobbyists. This picture was from 2 weeks ago. We were able to meet with Senator Schumer, the Senate House Majority Leader, one of the most powerful positions in our government. We told him our stories, much like that picture with us sitting around that table with pictures of our children, reliving the very worst day of our lives and telling him why COSA is so important to us. We got a commitment from him that he would bring this legislation to the Senate floor by the end of June. And just this morning, I received wonderful news that tomorrow in the US, on the 23rd, the House is going to mark up COSA. It's already been introduced, and that was the next milestone that we were looking for. Never in our history has there been, well, in recent history, it's been 30 years, have we had an online safety legislation that has gone this far. But we once again have to roll up our sleeves, go back to the House side, tell our stories, and encourage them to co-sponsor COSA. But we do this because we are powered by the memories of our children and the fact that we don't want these tragedies to happen to any other family.
I think I speak on behalf of everyone to say how brave you are, Kristen. I know you're being very objective and very strong, and it's very admirable. And it had to take a catastrophe for you to choose to save so many people's lives. I think through things that we don't realize how dangerous it could be, because maybe as parents, we're now grown up, we have thicker skin, we don't realize that our children are going through this and they're not as thick-skinned as us. And we've never lived that. When we were young, we didn't have social media, and we didn't have hundreds of people messaging us or bullying us, and so we don't even know how to empathize with what they're going through at a very young age. So I think this is a message, of course, to the full globe and the Arab world and everywhere where social media is active, to realize that it's not only somebody just getting irritated. It could lead to death. It could lead to also somebody being alive but depressed or suicidal or unhappy. It has a lot of effects if it's not mitigated. Steve, I want to also go to you. We want to tackle this from very different angles. The first question I have is, both of your friends, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, famously raised their kids in households that we could say they're either tech-free or it was semi-tech-free or limited. And Silicon Valley techies often send their children to walled-off schools where access to technology is rare and regulated. So it's a very interesting question where the people who are the geniuses in this technology are preventing their children at an early stage to go through technology, whether it's iPads or social media. So what do they fear? What are they not telling us?
Well, obviously they're smart and knowledgeable, and those kind of people tend to avoid becoming a victim to the habituality, to the addiction of certain types of, especially social web apps. But, you know, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and I think when we started Apple, we were so much guided by the father of somebody who's very important in the Center for Humane Technology that Kristen mentioned. His name's Asa Raskin, and Jeff Raskin at Apple came in, and he brought the value of people. They always have to be worth more than the technology. And what you have to do when you're building a product, you have certain chips and wires and ports, and they can do certain calculations, certain speed. You have to put a lot of effort into creating software so they work in a natural human mode the way humans work. And obviously this was long ago. And Jeff ran our publications department. Publications are like manuals that people will read, human beings will read. If the engineers had an idea for an enhancement to a product, the publications department would have to be able to write it in a clearly understandable form, or it was not allowed in Apple. That's the sort of company we had. So much emphasis on the human is more important than the technology. And, but we started an industry, and who knew where it would go. This was long before the internet. So this was back when you just bought a product, you owned it, you did whatever you wanted with it. It still worked the next year, still worked 40 years later, just like a broom you stored in your closet. You were responsible for the security of it. And those days are long past. The internet came, and eventually enough bandwidth came, and we had the social web started, and that's where we started going really wrong. And, and right now, the social web is protected in the United States by legislation that lets them publish anything. They're not the publisher. They're just a third-party source. So people can come on and do the cyberbullying all the time. I can go on and make a little point, and people will jump all over me explaining why they have a different feeling about things. And it could be something very simple. But when it gets down to even illegal things can be done very easily on the social web, and nobody's ever punished. There's no accountability to the social web themselves. They were removed from all accountability, all responsibility. And that's some legislation that we've got to start changing and crack through and make them realize when there's crimes going on under their nose, just assign a human being to watch a few things, a real human. Answer your phone call. If somebody calls and tries to get a hold of somebody to get something corrected, you need a human that will understand why it's important. And I'm sorry, computers never do. We go through all these, voice channels. We have a problem on our computer or phone, and we call in. It's so hard to get to a human being. You get fed all this information that was already in manuals that doesn't even solve your problem anyway. And these voice trees, that's how computers treat us. It's algorithms. I call it AI, algorithmic inefficiency. And it's sad, and I sometimes feel very kind of sorry for my role in having created this digital world early in those days when things were good, and then they kind of turned bad. And today, back then, you bought something, you owned it. It was yours. Like you even owned your life back then. Nowadays, you buy something, and if you make a setting, they'll change on you. They'll change it because they feel like it very often. Or they'll have an upgrade. And usually the upgrades to me are downgrades. And things that used to know how to use them and where they were on the screen, they're different places. They're hidden. They're non-existent now. They work a different way. And it's very not treating the customer. I always came up thinking that the low-level person who's a customer, the end user, is more important than the manufacturer. And I still have that philosophy to this day. And I think we need to do a lot of things. COSA is one really good example. Why would it ever run into any fights over this sort of thing? Yeah, what happened to me was people were publishing my face and me talking about things, and then they said, send me 1 Bitcoin, and I, Steve Wozniak, will send you back 2 Bitcoin. And then people started somehow emailing me. I didn't know this was going on. And they started emailing me saying that they put their life savings into it. Where was their Bitcoin? And Facebook wouldn't even, or was it Meta on that one? No, that was YouTube on Google. They wouldn't do one thing. You couldn't get to a human at all. And if they took something down, 10 more popped up of the same thing. They wouldn't assign a human to just watch it every day. If somebody sees one of these claims of Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Steve Wozniak offering to send you back more Bitcoin, just cancel it. Get rid of those people. Identify them to the police by their name. The anonymity is one of the big problems we have on the social web. And there should be ways around that. Anyway, so I agree with everything Kirsten said.
There was, I don't remember the exact words, but it was Mike Tyson saying it's so easy to talk and bully behind the screen until you actually get punched in the face. And he said it in a funny manner, but there's so much truth to it. Before social media and before anonymity, if we wanted to say something to somebody in school, you have to actually face them. So you would think 3 times before doing anything. Nowadays, you could be a coward. You could completely be invisible and just bully somebody with no consequences or accountability. And I think that's danger on many fronts. But to your answer, so can I easily say, Steve, that they kind of avoided technology because they realized that there is an addictive pattern to it for their children, and like you said, there is no control over the information that's being fed to children. It's just out there, and you can influence a child right or left. Is that in a nutshell?
Think about children in a classroom. If they're getting bullied, there's a human teacher there that can correct it and take steps on both sides of the bullying to help out. You just don't have that on the social web.
Correct.
It's very much the anonymity that it presents lets people behave in ways they wouldn't when they were around friends of theirs and socially responsible.
Kristen, I have an interesting long question, so I have to read it properly. At the higher level, you're an advocate for COSA Kids Online Safety Act, which is, congrats on tomorrow's news. It makes social media companies more responsible for the safety and well-being of young users. But it's also faced, surprisingly, real opposition for a variety of reasons, including possible over-surveillance of young people and potential for heavy censorship that could negatively impact developing teenagers. Do you think there are any ways that COSA approach risks sacrificing real-world well-being in pursuit of digital well-being? I think that's the first question. Or is it always just the tension we must wrestle when it comes to these kind of measures? The first point of this long question is it's surprising that there is resistance, but not. It's surprising because you think if any ethical company or any, I think, Steve, you mentioned how it was a human-centric approach back in the day. Nowadays, maybe it's a profit-centric approach that I could compromise people's lives and their well-being for profit. So I understand that's where the resistance could come. But it's also from a human-centric point of view, like, are you serious? Are you actually opposing something so basic and should be there? So.
Well, I'm just really glad that you asked that question. I did touch on it in the beginning. COSA is not a surveillance bill or a censorship bill, and that is what the messaging from the big tech lobbyists have been, and it is just absolutely not true. Kids under COSA can look up anything they want. What we're objecting to is the dangerous content and those 4 things that I talked about being fed to children through algorithms. And it will do some other things that Steve just mentioned in his own situation. It will require that these companies respond to parents who are bringing up concerns and issues. We all face this. It is like a brick wall when you are trying to reach out. You have a kid in crisis, and there's something terrible going around, and even though it violates the company's community guidelines, they either don't get a response back from the company, or it is a generic canned response saying it meets community guidelines when it doesn't. And so opening up that door would be really important. They have to respond within a certain number of days to complaints. But yeah, the issue of, and we have gone over this time and time again, we even strengthened the bill in the second reiteration where it was self-harm. Now those harms are defined as those 4 that I talked about: pro-suicide, pro-eating disorder, substance abuse, and sexual exploitation, and they're all linked to a medical diagnosis. So in no way, I mean, as a parent, I hate to think of kids still looking these things up, but under COSA, there's nothing we can do about that. That is free speech, freedom of information. But in no way is there censorship going on under COSA.
Can I ask you a question that's not here? Is it tiring, Kristen, to be fighting something that seems to be so basic?
I know. It is. I mean, we are asking for just the basic safeguards. Like every other industry, they have to think about their product before they release it. Yeah, it is tiring. Sometimes I'm almost like, I can't even believe we have to have these conversations. I passed legislation in Oregon State, and that was probably a mistake to do that first because I had no idea that passing federal legislation would require so much work.
Well, I think you have a full house here supporting you and people around the world because we feel it. We have our children, and what you're asking for there's no second thought to it. It's just a fight that people like you have to do it for the rest of us. So it's a bit unfair, but it's very, I'm grateful to know that there is somebody like you doing that.
Well, and I would just say we have representatives from around the world here. Stand up if you see something's wrong on social media. Speak out. We need to have these companies feel the pressure from around the world.
Yes. Steve, you've been very vocal about social media's impact on society, and from the proliferation of mental health problems that you've discussed to the increasing spread of misinformation. So we can talk about the mental health problems and we can talk about the misinformation, which you touched on. And you've said that platforms weren't designed with the long-term human well-being in mind, which is interesting when we talk about long-term. Maybe it started that way, but on the long term, it doesn't really look after that. So would you describe these products as more defective, or would you describe them as addictive?
Well, almost all technology starts out trying to be good. I mean, look at Facebook. People being in communication with all their friends all over the world, what a great idea. But then Facebook changed, and they changed to make money. And to make money, it was really, Facebook almost makes none of their money over you having friends and groups and all that, just some low-cost servers. What they make their money on is understanding you, learning everything about you. When you click like, it's not really going to the person that you'd like their post. It's going to 100 advertisers. You can even get a printout of their names. And everything you do in your life, the things you like, you look at, you're interested in, little words you say get remembered forever to be able to use. Yourself is worth money. You are the product, they say. And that is really weird. If it's me, myself, don't I deserve some of the money that my life is worth? My feelings, my beliefs, my values, don't I deserve some of it? No, you just get a little free email address or something. It's so low cost as long as they don't have to hire humans. And that's where we're short. We just try to figure out a solution. Going to start a company in Silicon Valley, we got to figure out a way to sell subscriptions so they don't really know the total cost. It's just per month, some reasonable amount. And we got to, everybody has to go through us in a cloud. They have to go through us, and we own you. We own everything you do. We'll make upgrades. We'll make changes that, whether you like them or not, we won't ask you. And we're gonna make all this money off of you doing nothing. We don't want to hire humans, because human who could listen to your problem and say, "Oh, that is real. We've got to take some corrective action." Oh no, don't want any accountability. Don't want any of that responsibility either. And so to even talk that way, they just say, you say, there's a crime going on. And what's the answer from these companies? It's free speech. And it might be a real crime, taking money from people. So we need to reevaluate this. I'm sort of sorry for my role in it. I often like to say that those of us who brought this digital world should be executed or worse yet, we should be made to live in it ourselves. And I get so frustrated when I'm doing something logical, maybe on an app on a phone, and it just doesn't work. I want things to work in life. And those days are pretty much past. It used to be that, for example, we could put speech recognition into a phone with no cloud, no Siri, no internet, just speech recognition, and you could tell it to do things and run apps and call people, call your wife, built into the phone. Nowadays, if you can't get to the internet because you're in a car traveling or something, if you can't get to the internet, you can't even get to Siri to make the call for you. Why don't you build the backup right into the phone? There are an awful lot of things that computers can do themselves without access to the internet. Access to the internet gives you more, but we've just sort of forgotten. We don't want to ever allow things to exist like as an app that you own and you bought and you paid for, and you control it and do the settings.
You know, Steve, you mentioned a few times today that it bothers you sometimes that maybe you played a role in this. However, I want to be the other side of it. There are pros and cons to everything in life. Maybe I will not be sitting with both of you here if there was no internet, if there was no iPhones, if there was no technology, even with a lot of people here. So it was something that was created, and it's a tool. I've always talked about social media and technology as a tool. We are the culprits as human beings. We know how to use this knife to cut a loaf of bread or to stab somebody. That's what it is in the end. So if I have to go to the other side and I say, Steve, with what you have created, whether through technology or Apple, what are the ways we can use it for well-being, for the good? Because we can. It's literally a tool. But if greed is overcoming us, of course we're using it and abusing it. But if we actually say this tool can bring societies together, can educate parents to bring up children better, that can bring three people from very different parts of the world together and just talk about normal things that we all care about. So you see, there are many dimensions to this. So if I go to the other side and I ask you, what can we do now using all of the technology that's available to maybe enhance the world? You know, you can use it for so many good things.
We put too much of our trust into technology to come up with the answers. AI is an example. Look at AI and ask a question, you get a ton of detailed, here's what you can do and this and that, and propose to your boss. But then again, I think it's a good search engine in a sense, in one way, but there should be a human being who sits and looks at what comes from AI, since it's known to hallucinate or have deep fakes, and a human should say, what is this? Can I understand it? Now can I repeat it in my own words because I learned from it? However, some just pass it on. And passing on a lot of these AI reports, it's still boring. It's not like from a human that has emotions. As a professor in Nashville that allows AI reports in his class, he's never had one good enough to give more than a C+ grade. They're just too boring unless it goes through a human that understands how to concisely pick out the right parts of it, and they convey a meaning in my head and they'll convey a meaning in my boss's head. But it involves a lot of understanding, and we tend to think AI is really thinking, not a prayer. AI, I believe in the A, and it's artificial. Yeah, and you know, intelligence, is it really thinking? Is it doing anything like the human brain? We've always known that when computers could play tic-tac-toe or checkers or chess, that they were just following sets of rules, simple sets of rules, and they could play themselves and develop their own set of rules because they can play 1 trillion games in a day, and no human being could ever do that and remember it all. So, you know, and that leads to a bunch of algorithms, but it's not thinking. When I went back to college after 10 years, Apple was successful. I went under a fake name to get my last year of college. I went as a psychology major to study these things and what is intelligence and what are brains and how do they compare to computers. And all I found out is we do not know how the brain is wired. how it's hooked up. We have little bits of outer information about it. We don't even know that our memories are in the brain, or we could find them. We could find them and say, here are some synapse connections that add up to a word like corn. No, we can't. Well, I was with a company once that figured out how to make a brain. Takes 9 months. Thanks.
Sometimes,
That's like,
sometimes less. I came in 8 months.
No.
When we started Apple, we wanted to make blind people and sighted people more equal. And look how much we've succeeded. Everywhere you go, look on the sidewalk, and people are walking around.
Kristen, I want to go from big decisions, big moves, which you're doing, but I also believe it all trickles down to the individual. So we talked about how you can play a huge role, which you are, in governance and legislation and rules and regulations, because we can all agree some things have to be rules. You can't just expect people to do the right thing.
Right.
So we agree on that. But it also comes, like you said, that each of us plays a role in your house, in your family, between your friends. So how would you, let's bring it down to the individual. What do you have to say out of all the knowledge you have today to the individual, to the parent, to the brother, to the sister?
Well, unfortunately for us, we were the first generation of parents raising kids on iPhones, and they were really the lab rats for this terrible experiment. The parents that I meet now that have younger kids and tweens, they are learning from our mistakes and our tragedies, and they want to do things differently. In the United States, there's a movement called Wait Until 8th, and we have a new book out by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, and these movements are pushing waiting to give your child a smartphone until high school, when they're through middle school. And this way, they really develop the foundation of what a real friend is and what real interaction is before you set them up for looking for likes and followers. That's artificial friendship. And so I've been really impressed with the younger parents, and we hope that this movement can pick up and be spread around the world. I think by building that movement grassroots up with how individuals are dealing with this at a family level and legislation, we can finally make a dent in the social media harms.
Yeah, I like how you sandwiched it.
Right.
I think that's the right approach, because the pressure comes not only from Kristen, but from everybody as a society. Stephen, you mentioned there's a quote that I have of you from 1996. It said, "Our first computers were born not out of greed or ego, but in the revolutionary spirit of helping common people rise above the most powerful institutions." So yeah, I bring something from the past. So big tech rarely has real people and real lives, like you also mentioned earlier, in mind anymore. And there's certainly a lot to feel quite hopeless about. But, and this is something the summit will look at even more tomorrow, where do you see the silver linings? Where do the common people still win? Where can we find harmony and health in technology?
Is it difficult to find that anymore? I mean, we went through a long time in Silicon Valley of increasing the economic background of the country, and through Moore's law and chips. We used to make one transistor when I was very young, and for the same cost now we make 60 billion transistors on one chip in your iPhone. And so we've gone through this. A lot of young people want to be entrepreneurs. I believe strongly in entrepreneurs, that entrepreneurs starting new businesses sometimes find new ways of doing things in life that didn't exist before, and it's not a zero-sum game. It's the principal method of increasing economies, and that's good. The trouble is, we find out that, well, there's more money in avoiding humans and getting away from responsibility. A lot of companies start up, how will we market this? What will our business model be? The business models have changed a lot. And it's hard to see the silver lining in that side of things. As far as for people, we have examples like Christians that teach us lessons, but really, up until 8 years old, we should have in primary education, we should have courses where students are shown, here are some examples of bullying or what's wrong in other ways, and you don't want to ever go in that way. It starts with the most important positive aspect of being a good person is being honest. Honesty, that's where it starts with. Long ago, that's one influence that I got from my parents, thankfully, because you don't ever think, how do I say something that I think a different way, but I'm going to tell somebody else this is good for you, but I know what the problems with it are, and I'm not speaking them. Why are these companies so silent about what they do, what they don't do, what their algorithms are, how they manipulate you? They don't want to come out and talk about it because they know it's bad. If you're honest, you're only saying truths that you really, truly believe inside.
There was, I do interviews, and I was talking recently about, it was a very basic question, but my director kind of shed light. And I was like, why are children harsh? You know, kids don't care if they see somebody like, he's ugly. They don't even filter it. And I'm like, why do kids do that in school? Why do they bully? And my director said it so simply. He said, they lack empathy because they lack experience. So we can't blame the child sometimes that he's attacking or saying something harsh. We have to blame people for not bringing the right ethics, for giving them tools, like you said, Kristen, that is allowing them to do this kind of behavior. So there was another point where people nowadays, they'll put an iPhone in front of them, click record, and they'll say, oh, you know, I'm not doing well, blah, blah, blah. This person hurt me. I'm feeling really sad. I'm depressed. Click, post, being vulnerable. And that's not really vulnerability. That's you and a piece of equipment. Let's do that conversation with the person that hurt you.
Right.
Face to face.
Right.
That's life. And that's what you said, up to 8 or up to 9. Maybe that's what we need children to learn, social skills, how to make friends, how to not make friends, how to be jealous of or get in a fight. Or you learn how to deal with human beings. You learn how to look at people in their eyes and have a conversation. And I think that's the scary part. Go ahead.
Well, even experienced adults, though, get scammed these days by all the internet scams, the spam, the ones trying to fish you and get your email addresses and all. And a lot of people have been hurt by that, and even with experience. Now, for children, if you're experienced in life and you can think things out, maybe you're an experienced driver on the roads, and you say, oh my gosh, these young people are so horrible. Well, all of us were inexperienced before we became experienced. It's a step you have to go through.
Steve, the chairman mentioned also that recently you had a talk about happiness or the purpose of life. Can you, before, I know we have to finish, but can you touch on that?
Yeah, before Apple, and I was in college and made my first year of college, and I read an article about a man named Sumner Redstone, who was CEO of Viacom, a big media company, and in today's dollars, he was going off and buying a company for $1 billion and going to another city to sell one for $1 billion. And as I read the article, that's in today's dollars, I thought, oh my gosh, would I want to be that man with so much power, so much wealth? And then I remembered a funny story, a prank that myself and some friends had played, or a joke that we told them. We laughed. And I said, on the day I die, I'd rather be laughing. And I decided that life was not about accomplishment as much for me. It was about happiness, enjoying things, smiling, things that make you laugh, a lot of comedy, making your own jokes, making your own pranks, going to comedy, going to music, whatever makes you happy, and smile. So I said, life is about happiness. H equals S minus F. Happiness equals smiles minus frowns. Minus frowns is the key part. A lot of people say, oh, I'll just tell myself don't frown. No, there are actually techniques. One of the big techniques is don't argue. If you argue, you have a line of reasoning, somebody else has a line of reasoning, and they come to a different conclusion. The important thing to realize is, well, everybody has a good head that they want to follow some reasoning to get to their answers. So everybody's good. There ain't no good guy, there ain't no bad guy. There's only you and me, and we just disagree, is what Dave Mason sang. And there are Bob Dylan quotes along those lines. So don't argue to avoid frowns. Also, if something goes bad, it's making you frown, your car gets dented, take a constructive step. You take the car to a body shop to get it fixed. Just always forget a lot about the past. Don't go back and question the past. Oh my gosh, if I'd only done something different. Well, why? Then all you're going to do is wind up with a reason to frown, to feel that you didn't do as good as you could have. So my formula, happiness equals smiles minus frowns, is one I've lived with to this day. I didn't need anything like Apple to have, life made for me forever.
Kristen, I'd like to end this session with you. If you have any words for all of us, I know it's a compact panel, but it's a very important one. So if you have anything that you'd like to add that you can leave us with.
Well, I think even though my story is tragic, when I look back at the comments and the exchanges that happened between Carson and his abusers, he listened to the things we as parents talked about at the dinner table about not typing anything online that you would not want on a billboard with your name and face next to. We talked to our kids about the fact that behind the screen is a person. And one of the things that has really come out of Carson's story is that in the end, kindness really does matter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jose Mourinho, for that truly special interview. See what I did there? Lama, that was a very well orchestrated discussion as well. It's amazing to hear insights on what players go through, what managers go through, the integration of tech in the world of football, and how far it's come in the last few years, especially with goal line technology, etc. So thank you for that. Moving on, or before we move on to our next session, we have an exclusive video, a promo screening for Sync's new campaign. If we can roll the film, please. a very thought-provoking video. Before we start our next session, which I'll be moderating, one that I'm very much looking forward to, if I can ask that those who did not download the app yet to do so now. It's Sync Summit 2024. So there's a lot of interaction that is going to come throughout the day, one of which is a voting exercise or mechanism. So it's very important to download the app so that you can join us in that voting element that's going to come soon. Moving on, we've already talked today about the tensions of living in the digital era and how that affects our health and well-being. And perhaps nowhere are these tensions made clearer in black and white than Sync's most recent global digital well-being report, which surveyed 35,000 people across every age bracket and 5 continents, revealing a sense of anxiety around the opportunities that we all feel technology brings to us, and the simultaneous challenges it presents in terms of our digital well-being. To discuss this report, I'm very excited about this panel, and what the insights could tell us about where we're heading, I'd like to welcome to the stage our panelists for the next session. Best-selling author and former Chief of Business Officer of Google X, Mo Gaudat. Followed by the Middle East lead for PSB Insights, who collaborated on this research with Sync, Mr. Michael Hodgkinson. And last but not least, we have the Chief Executive Officer of Beyond Our Edge, John Hagel. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you all so very much for taking time in coming to ITHRA and being a part of Sync 2024. Michael, if I can start with you, please, for our first question. So this year's Digital Global Wellbeing Report, one that you were instrumental in, showed a clear global trend towards a healthier use of tech, which is really good news, with more people actively seeking greater control over their digital lives. Question is, why do you think that is, and do you see it continuing in the future?
Brilliant. Thank you, Mohammed, and lovely to be with you all today. I think I should start with just saying thank you to the Sync research team, so especially Fahad Al-Bayahi, who's been a very strong supporter of this research over the past 4 years. Exactly to your question, we started doing this work kind of 3 or 4 years ago. In 2022, we did our first study, and at that time, we were still recovering from the pandemic. I mean, I think all of us had found that technology was an important way for us to cope with the pandemic, to deal with some of its negative influences that we could help. But actually, returning to normal was hard. And I think we kind of acknowledged that in our research. What we found when we did the survey last year, in 2023, that we're publishing at the moment, is that for most people, they feel like their use of technology is getting better. It's improving, it's becoming more healthy. Now, I wouldn't say that is healthy. So what's important here is that it's starting from a low base and people are getting better. But what we clearly see is that people are concerned about the health impact. So if you ask people about whether they find technology to be addictive, they almost universally agree. But at the same time, almost very contradictorily, they'll say that actually technology is better for their mental health rather than worse for their mental health. It speaks to this kind of paradox to our theme today in the way that people are seeing technology at the moment. So in essence, it has got better. People are finding that with this concern around digital technology, they are able to find mechanisms to cope. But I would say we're certainly starting from a very low base.
So just on the point of the paradox, the study showed that 56% of respondents to the survey believe that they have used AI, while 68% don't even understand AI. Question is, what does the understanding gap here tell us about tech today, where some people don't understand it yet use it?
Yeah, I think again it speaks to these almost contradictions in the way that everyone's seeing this use of technology. It's one of these things that, so AI is something that quite clearly people think they are using a lot, But I think actually, if you ask people what AI is, and I can almost say this to the room today, if we went around and asked people what AI is and who was using it and how they were using it, we get a whole myriad of different answers. And this is from a group of people who are here today at a conference about digital technology, about digital well-being. So AI is a poorly understood concept. It's a very important one, though. It's one that people are talking about quite a lot. And I think one thing I would just emphasize with this confusion or this difference around AI is it is something that generationally, we are seeing clear differences globally. So if you look at Gen Z, they're turning around and going, well, AI is all about, it's mimicking human interaction, it's mimicking decisions that we can make, it's understanding algorithms. They grew up with algorithms, so they can talk about AI in that sense. But if you ask millennials about AI, they'll talk to you about ethics. They'll talk to you about the concerns around the issues that AI will generate. If you talk to Gen X about it, they'll say, well, how's it going to influence the workplace? So actually, AI is one of these things that globally is affecting generations much more than it's affecting regions or individual people. And we're seeing different generations really deal with it in a very different way, which I think speaks to the kind of very diverse set of opinions we have around AI at the moment.
Mo, there's always been some level of debate around the potential risks of tech advancements. I've seen you speak about it. I think I've watched every podcast you've ever been on. And you've actually described it as the end of truth. Can you talk a little bit more about what this means in confronting the complexities of a digital paradox?
Well, thank you for watching every podcast. That's wonderful.
I
Thank you guys for having me. I love this place. I don't think there is any debate about the potential risk of technology, right? I think there is the paradox of potential risk and potential payback, but the risks have always been there. We've lived them. We're paying for them every day. And I think they're magnified every single year that passes with the advancement of technology. We're really getting risks on steroids, if you think about it. And I think the reality is that, when you talk about artificial intelligence, how many people used AI? Yeah, we say 64 or 62% or 56%. How many people are used by AI? Every single one of us. So every single one of us, as we swipe on social media or we try to find something on the internet, we're being brain reprogrammed by a machine. There is a very, very significant risk to that. And when you really think about what's happening in our world today, the truth is there is no longer any truth. There is no longer any truth because from one side, your view of the world is highly biased by how you train your algorithm. And so if you're a believer in one thing or the other, somehow you start to believe that the whole world agrees with you because content around that topic starts to pop up in your feed all the time. And as a result of that, you are more and more brain programmed, if you want, to follow what the machine is teaching you. Now, here's the interesting side of all of this. If you ask me what was the most wide-scale deployment of AI so far, in the last 10, 15 years, since we started to figure out things like, deep learning, we've used it and trained it to manipulate human minds. Its top skill is to convince you to do what you don't even know that you're being convinced to do anymore. And somehow that risk continues to escalate. Now, what does that mean? It basically means, believe it or not, that we just need to deploy our intelligence a little more in terms of becoming aware that not everything that you see is true. Last I looked, there were 60,000 Instagram influencers that are not human. Okay, if you've seen the last, announcement by ChatGPT, by OpenAI about ChatGPT 4.0, it is the movie Her. It even sounds like her, right? When you look at Gemini and the announcements in Google I/O, fantastic product, but it's now being built into everything. So, it's part of search, part of photos, part of news, part of this, part of that. And you will be interacting with it without knowing that it's there at all. That's the natural evolution of technology. And it's quite a big paradox because I will tell you openly, I spend 3 hours a day dealing with AIs and the information wealth on the internet. But at the same time, I need to start questioning if this is the right way to live.
It's always good and bad, and Anas Bukhash touched on how it's a tool that can be used for positive and negative. And if I was to ask you, are you more optimistic about the positives, or are you more worried about the negatives that AI bring? What would you say?
I've always made my statement very clear. One, there is absolutely nothing wrong with AI. Zero, nothing wrong with AI. It's the way humans use AI that is wrong. Okay? The way humans use AI for their benefits at the expense of other humans. That's one. The second, which is really very clear in my mind, is that we will go through a cycle. It's not a 1 or a 0. I think we will struggle in the coming years until we realize that this is finally working against us. We need to get to a point of unbearable pain so that we start to turn around. Okay, and if we expect that this turnaround is going to be regulation or external engagement and so on, good luck. I think the reality is that each and every one of us needs to recognize today, just like you recognize how bad sugar is for your diet, right? Those who make that decision get massive improvements in their health. The sugar industry is still rampant, right? But you can make that choice. You can personally tell yourself, I need to change something here. I need to become aware that this is not entirely the truth. I need to become aware that this is becoming so much more intelligent than I am, and rather than than wait for someone to help you, I think each and every one of us needs to start making choices, just like we cut sugar, to cut stupid reels, really.
Great comparison, one that resonates with me. John, your book, The Journey Beyond Fear, explores personal and organizational transformation in the face of uncertainty and rapid change. How might those learnings about handling our fears help us to tackle anxieties of our own in this digital transformation age?
Yeah. Well, I started writing the book, The Journey Beyond Fear, almost 9 years ago. I was traveling around the world as part of my work, and everywhere I went, the dominant emotion that I was encountering was fear. At the highest levels of organizations, lowest levels out in the communities. And I should be specific, I'm talking about fear of the future. When we look into the future, do we see it primarily as a threat or as an opportunity? And I think more and more people around the world are seeing the future as very threatening, very scary. I'm afraid. They don't want to admit the fear, and I think the first step for all of us is to acknowledge the fear, because it has significant consequences in terms of our actions. And I think at one level, fear is very understandable as an emotion. I've spent decades now studying the long-term forces that are reshaping our global economy and society. And one element of that change is mounting performance pressure on all of us. It takes many different forms. One form is simply intensifying competition on a global scale. We're competing with companies and people that anywhere in the world. Second element is accelerating pace of change. Things we thought we could count on are no longer there. Then finally, if that weren't enough, there's a third element, which is because of all the connectivity we're creating around the world, a small event in a faraway place in the world quickly cascades into an extreme disruptive event, leaving us scrambling to figure out what to do next. Dare I mention the pandemic as just one example of that kind of disruptive change. Any one of those three would be pretty scary. All three together, again, I think the fear is understandable. But here, the challenge is it's also very limiting for us, because it's preventing us from unleashing the full potential of digital technology. And in this context, paradoxes become a key theme in this conference. I think there's an interesting paradox about the big shift. On the one side, as I mentioned, it's creating mounting performance pressure on all of us. At the same time, it is creating exponentially expanding opportunity. We can create far more value, far more quickly, with far less resource than would have ever been imaginable. But here's the challenge. If we're driven by fear, we can't even see those opportunities, much less be motivated to pursue them. So we need to find ways to move beyond the fear and cultivate. Again, based on research I've done, I've become a proponent of a specific form of passion. I call it the passion of the explorer. I believe we all have the potential within us to draw it out and pursue it. But if we can find that passion of the explorer and pursue it, we can now be positioned to address the exponentially expanding opportunity that's being created by technology. But I think the key point of a lot of my work recently is that emotions play a central part in being human. And unfortunately, we've increasingly come to take the view of emotions are a distraction. Just focus on the data and the analytics, and that's where the truth is. Well, no, the truth starts with our emotions. If we don't understand what's motivating us to act, we're going to be at a loss. And I think we all have the potential to draw out that passion of the explorer to motivate us to address the opportunities that are being created by digital technology.
John, you worked on a zoom-in, zoom-out strategy, a method favored by some of the world's most successful digital technology companies in navigating the complexities and uncertainty in general. Can you just give us a synopsis on what the strategy entails?
Sure. As context, I've been in Silicon Valley now for 44 years and had an opportunity to work with some of the most successful technology companies in Silicon Valley. And many of them pursue a strategy that is very different from the strategy that most traditional organizations pursue. They've never given it a name. I call it zoom out, zoom in. But the interesting thing about this strategy is it focuses on two time horizons in parallel. One time horizon, 10 to 20 years. That's the zoom out. And it says we need to look ahead 10 to 20 years and anticipate a really large opportunity, an exponentially large opportunity that could completely transform the business we're in. So that's zoom out. Zoom in, very different time horizon, 6 to 12 months. And on that horizon, the questions are, what are the 2 or 3 initiatives, no more, 2 or 3 that we could pursue in the next 6 to 12 months that would have the greatest impact in accelerating our movement towards that bigger opportunity? And do we have a critical mass of resource in the next 6 to 12 months to support those initiatives? And how would we measure progress? Interesting thing. So zoom out, zoom in, 10 to 20 years, 6 to 12 months. Where do most traditional organizations spend their time on strategy? It's the 5-year plan. Year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. That's our strategy. Interesting observation. The companies I'm talking about spend almost no time on 1 to 5 years. It's either all about 10 to 20 years or 6 to 12 months. Their belief is if they get that right, the 1 to 5 years will take care of itself over time. And I think it's interesting on many levels, but one value is that, if you take a 5-year horizon, you can pretty much convince yourself that 5 years from now, you're going to be the same business or organization you are today. There'll be some modest changes, but basically the same business. If you go out 10 to 20 years and you really understand exponential change, and you believe you're going to be the same business or organization that you are today, get back to the drawing board. You haven't understood exponential change. So it forces leadership out of their comfort zone and forces them to really think about the changes that are going on in the world today. And it also focuses on action. I mean, I think many of you have participated in these blanking on what they call them now, but the scenario planning, scenario development exercises where you get the leadership to go off to an off-site and creatively think about the future, future 1, future 2, future 3. Maybe we'll even, pick one that's the most likely future. And then we go back to work. Meeting is over. Get back to work. It's a theoretical, conceptual exercise. With zoom out, zoom in, the meeting is not over until we have committed to 2 or 3 initiatives in the next 6 to 12 months and committed a critical mass of resource. So it's focused on action and learning, which is a very different kind of mindset that I think helps to really drive impact. And I just want to also pull back and say that one of the reasons I'm so passionate about the zoom out, zoom in approach is its impact on emotions. I mentioned emotions before. The key here is with zoom out, zoom in, if you can identify a really exponentially large opportunity 10 to 20 years from now, it starts to build some excitement about the future. It's not just threat. There's a big opportunity out there that we can pursue. Now, most people who are driven by fear are going to be skeptical and dismissive and say, wait a minute, that future vision is just it's a fantasy. It's never going to happen. If you can show in 6 to 12 months real movement, progress towards that opportunity, now all of a sudden you overcome the skepticism that many people are going to have driven by fear, and it overcomes the fear, and they start to build that excitement and passion about how can I join, how can I participate in that opportunity. So it motivates all of us, I think, ultimately to pursue that exponentially expanding opportunity, the opportunities that are created by digital technology. So if I can, one more minute, I'll just give a quick example, because many companies who pursue this strategy are not public about it. One that it has been written about that I can talk about is a small startup in Redmond, Washington, back in the 1970s, a company you may have heard of called Microsoft.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Bill Gates pursued a zoom out, zoom in approach to strategy. Back in the 1970s, his zoom out view of the computer industry was summarized in 2 sentences. One is computing is moving inexorably from large mainframes to the desktop. And second, if you want to be a leader in the computer industry, you need to be a leader in the desktop. It wasn't a detailed blueprint of what that future was going to look like, but it had enough detail that it helped them to make the right choices in the 1970s to position themselves to become a leader in the computer industry. And so I think it emphasizes the notion, people say to me, well,
It's a bit late for that now.
after all this, hopefully you could hear some of what I said.
I heard it all.
Should we start again?
Yeah, I'll start from the beginning again. So with the zoom out, it's a notion of focusing on the trends that are reasonably predictable. When Bill Gates was doing this back in the 1970s, he was looking at the progress in terms of the technology and seeing that it was exponentially improving, and you could get on the desktop the power that you now had in a mainframe, reasonably predictive. Second was he could see the frustration of people standing in line waiting to get to that mainframe so that they could get a very simple question answered. Huge frustration and unmet need, reasonably predictable that if he could offer a desktop computer, they would buy it. So yes, the future is uncertain. There are a lot of unpredictable things, but find the things that are reasonably predictable that are going to create enormous opportunities, and that's the opportunity to really drive the technology that's becoming available.
Thank you. I think you have a reaction to that.
I am actually very intrigued. I have to say, you really got me thinking, because I spent 27 years in the corporate world, and yes, I could see fear everywhere. But as I left the corporate world, I think the paradox is I could only see greed.
You could only see?
Greed, as I looked back on the corporate world. And you're right to say it's always emotion, right? And I have to say, I'm really brainstorming out loud here, because the interesting side of all of this is systemic bias. Like, why are we doing all of this? Like, why do we, at the time when Microsoft started, and I worked at Microsoft in the early years and worked with Bill Gates and learned a ton, we needed all of this. We needed the tech, we needed all of the advancements. When the internet started, we needed all of this. I'm now at a point in my life where I'm saying, this is really cool. Like, this life is amazing. Why do we need to make it faster? Why do we need to make it cheaper? Why do we need to make it more efficient? Why do we give hand over everything to artificial intelligence to cut the cost of call center agents at the beginning? Like, why does that matter? And I have to say, I'm actually not making a comment. I'm really intrigued if we are missing the change of context. That the paradox really is that this is it. Like, we've made it. Can we chill and enjoy all of this? Or is there any reason other than greed to continue to run and continue to grow and continue to create, more and more and more? I don't get it. I honestly don't.
No, it's interesting. I mentioned the limiting factor of fear, the emotion of fear. And if you're driven by fear, there are many consequences. One is you shrink your time horizon. All you can do is focus on today. Forget about the future. It's too challenging already today. And you adopt a win-lose view of the world. Yeah. It's either I win or you win. We're not going to have a win-win view. And so it fosters that greed that I think is very scary and very limiting, again, in terms of the potential for people to really harness I'm sorry, I have to quickly also reference the artificial intelligence comment. I think every talk here has to mention artificial intelligence at least once. In artificial intelligence, I deal with leaders of large organizations around the world, and I'm going to generalize and summarize, but the general question I get from leaders today is, how quickly can I automate, and how many jobs can I eliminate?
Exactly.
Because it's that greed of cutting costs, right? All I want to do is cut costs. What if we took those people who today are consumed by routine, tightly specified, highly standardized tasks and freed them from those tasks by letting AI and other technology take over that aspect of work and focus everyone on how to be more innovative and creative in their organizations? Everyone, not just in research labs, but in maintenance facilities, in all aspects of a business. And so I think that's the missed opportunity, again, because we're driven by fear, and it's just cut costs and greed and versus what opportunities are waiting to be addressed.
Michael, how do you react to that, the fear-based scenario planning that John touched on, in addition to what Mo said about how, I don't know, it feels like we have all the tech we'll ever need.
Yeah.
We don't need it to be faster or cheaper. Any reactions to both
Yeah,
those
no,
points?
certainly. And I think one thing that was just coming to mind when you were both talking about that was, if you ask people straight out, is AI going to be a force for good or not? They broadly think it will be. So about 70% of people say AI will be a force for good going forward. That being said, a majority of people, again to our point about paradoxes, a majority of people right now would pause the development of AI if they could. Now, I know the genie is out of the bottle and that's not going to happen, but at the same time, what we are seeing here is almost a contradictory element of, I believe AI will be good in the long term. I'm concerned about my job. I'm concerned about the impact that's going to have. But actually, if I could just take a second and pause, I would do that. And I think that's what that is saying with those data points. So really, I think when you start talking in terms of long term, when you start getting into this element of fear and what that might mean, you do see people thinking twice about AI and actually looking past this very immediate, oh great, I can do these things on my phone that I could maybe or maybe not otherwise do, and start thinking about it in a very different way. So I certainly think that's coming out in the data. But of course, the problem with this is not your usual conversation. This is not the conversation people are having over their dinner table every night and in this kind of manner. So actually, talking about it in this way, I think people will become more aware of it, and we'll start to see those views change in the longer term as people become aware of the potential implications of what is happening.
It is scary because in my field of work, just when I thought I'm not replaceable as a podcaster, I have a podcast, it's in English, and my editor 2 weeks ago sent me a clip of our previous guest, which was all in English, an hour and a half. He wanted to flex his AI muscles on me, so he sent me a 30-second clip of her speaking in Arabic. I was like, what does that mean for me? Am I going to one day be, which was shocking. She didn't utter a word of Arabic. She's Saudi. But I got a 30-second clip of her speaking Arabic in her voice. So where does it end? What's replaceable? What isn't? I'm just thinking out loud here.
But there is, so I'm a podcaster too, and there is a beauty in this. There is beauty in using technology to open the communication between all of us. There is a channel on YouTube that has historical speeches made by non-English speakers, dubbed by AI into English. And when you hear them, you suddenly go like, oh, they're not as bad as we thought they were. They were just talking to their countries in their own language, right? And there is beauty if AI was used to help us communicate better. There is beauty in terms of augmenting my knowledge in the world in a way that gives me 100 IQ points more. Fantastic. But the challenge is that paradox that Michael was talking about. There is stuff marketed into our heads that makes us say, yeah, AI is going to be amazing for us. I think, no, the idea is that what we know is AI has the potential to be amazing for us. And then you ask us and say, would you continue developing it? And we'll say no, because we know that it's not going to be good for us, because the way it's going to be used is going to help more productivity, more capital, more shareholder value, more, cut costs, remove people, and so on. I always publicly say there's absolutely nothing wrong with intelligence, nothing wrong with artificial intelligence, nothing wrong with the growth of technology, nothing wrong with the growth of the internet. The problem is that they are deployed in uses that are benefiting a few and ignoring the benefit of the majority. If AI, like John was saying, was going to give people more time to connect and be creative and innovative, amazing, right? But if it's used, if you conduct a human connection kind of interview and it gets dubbed into 100 languages, amazing, right?
Eliminates the language barrier.
Yeah, the problem is your podcast producing company one day will say, why do I need a host at all? Maybe I can use an AI that will mimic that. And then very quickly they'll say, why do I even need guests at all? I can use AIs to do that. I promise you, on my podcasts, I experimented with that. No host and no guest. AIs talking to AIs. Sounds quite normal, actually, if I don't tell you that they are machines.
Did the audience know any better?
We never published it,
okay.
but the truth is you can see demos of that online. The question is, whose benefit that is for? It's for the benefit of the bottom line of the podcast producing company, right? Maybe we should change our mindset. That's the paradox.
So unreplaceable. John, I think you had a reaction.
I just wanted to offer one of my favorite quotes is from somebody you probably all have heard of, Pablo Picasso, the painter. And back many decades ago, he made the observation, he said, computers are absolutely useless. All they can do is provide you with the answers. He said the most important, powerful thing is what are the questions to ask? And yes, there are some routine questions. So in routine processes, you ask one question, then another question, then another question. But what about the questions that have never been asked before that could lead to the creation of much greater value and deliver to stakeholders, not just to customers, but not just to investors, but to a lot of other people? And that's, I think, the real potential we have here with the technology is to let AI take help us create the answers, help us with the routine questions, and focus us on the questions that have never been asked before to create much more value.
Yeah. The sci-fi movies paint a grim picture of what AI has in store for us. And I'm pretty sure it's on many people's minds here of the theory of the machines taking over one day. Maybe I watch too much sci-fi. I don't know, Mo, is that
inevitable? It's inevitable. It's inevitable that we will hand over to AI. It's inevitable. Why? Because you will always hire the smartest person in the room to do the job. Will they take over? That's a different story. That's drama, right? It's inevitable that your finances in 5 years' time are going to be handed over to the smartest finance person in the room, which is an AI. It's inevitable that a lot of the admin jobs in terms of booking my flight here and my hotel and everything will be handed over to a machine. It's inevitable. Why? Because they do every task we assign to them better than humans. The question is, what do humans do then, right? The question is, can we use this? Here's the trick. The most expensive resource on the planet, believe it or not, is not energy, is not materials and so on. It's intelligence. Because with more intelligence, I can create energy for free. Energy is abundant, all of us. If I'm smarter, I can find a way to harness that energy over the next 15, 20 years, for free. In a world with so much abundance, why do we compete? Why are we waking up every morning saying, my shareholders, not his shareholders? Because we're stuck in a systemic bias of a system that we invented hundreds of years ago, 150 years ago. And we're stuck in that system repetitively in a systemic downward cyclone, okay? And the question is, we will hand over to AI, but can we do that in ways that make us free, that make us knowledgeable, that make us connected, that make us enjoy life more, okay? With abundance for every single one of us. Can we? Yes, we can. Will we?
Remains to be seen.
That's the paradox.
Michael, we have about 4 minutes left. From the study that you worked on with Sync Digital, on the Digital Wellbeing Report of 2023, more optimism to extract from that? Do you feel more optimism looking a few years into the future?
I mean, yes and no. I think from our conversation just at the moment, it's clear that there are both sides to it. I think there is optimism in the sense of people are becoming more aware of the debates that are being had, and they are taking agency in ensuring that they can, to the best of their abilities, and I think that's an important caveat, to the best of their abilities, are looking to take healthier steps when it comes to these things. But I think, and it's something we haven't touched on very much right now, but I think kind of is important with this for maybe the next 12 months to think about it in terms of kind of short and long, is what does government do? And I think this is absolutely critical. We've got these big changes that are happening across the world. They're affecting people globally. No one's clear who's leading on it. It's all a bit part at the moment. So I think the key thing to make sure that we can harness the benefits of this is ensuring that actually there is clear leadership in terms of where the regulation lies. And I think the research does bear that out, that actually the leadership does need to be there in order to ensure that we can take advantage of the advantages that technology offers us.
Great. Thank you. Any closing points? We have a few minutes to spare before we go into a 30-minute break. John, if you'd like to close with any comments?
Well, maybe just one example that gives me optimism, that I'm not a pessimist at all. A clinical laboratory company was facing issues in their client service call center operations. Customers were very unhappy. They were leaving the company at an accelerating rate. The leader of the call center operations came to the organization, came to the department and said, number one, I promise none of you are going to lose your jobs. But your first assignment is to work with the technology department to figure out how they can take over all the routine calls that are consuming all your time. And then, when you free up your time, focus on the calls you've never seen before, heard before, and be creative about what kind of answers you can provide to the customers. And the result was customer satisfaction went way up, call center longevity of the employees got way much larger, and the interesting thing again was this notion of really unleashing the passion that the people had in that department to say, I'm finally making a difference that nobody else could make. It wasn't just following a manual that anybody could read. It was addressing problems that had never been seen or heard before. And they got excited about it and delivered huge value to the customers. So I'm an optimist that if we do this, we can unleash incredible value.
Yeah. Mo?
I am an optimist that if we do this, we can unleash a lot of value. And I think this conversation is about telling everyone, that if we rely on the existing systems and paradoxes, we will not do this. Okay?
Yes.
That your
If we're
key
driven
word.
by fear,
Yeah,
if we're driven by fear and hold on to what we have.
Your key word is you're not going to lose your job. You're going to have a more exciting job.
Yes.
Right? Can we do that? Can we do that? Can we actually think in a macro way and say, if all of humanity starts to struggle with losing their jobs, there's not going to be a lot of purchasing power left for all of us to make or create or do anything at all, right? Is there a way for governments, for thought leaders to say, by the way, if we create a world of abundance for everyone, we grow too, right? And I think that the whole concept here is the question of if. If we are still stuck in that systemic bias that worked really well for us so far.
The fear.
And induced a lot of fear. Where will we go? And if we start to actually think, this is my bottom line, or not of what we can do, but why we do it. Why? How can we improve the lives of everyone involved? And as a result of that, make a lot of money. At Google, we used to call that the toothbrush test, right? Can we make people's lives better with our products, and as a result, get a lot of money? If we can get that thinking going, I think the paradox will work in our favor.
Fantastic. I think this panel was a perfect segue to the one that's coming on in 30 minutes, which addresses regulation and autonomy. But for now, a round of applause for my three panelists.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you had a great, refreshing break, because we still have a lot of sessions going on. Let's get down to business. Now, our next session is hosted by a digital well-being pioneer and the founder of Half the Story, which is the first nonprofit dedicated to empowering the next generation's healthy relationship with social media. Please welcome to the stage Larissa May.
Hello, everyone. What is a device without a human? What is a human without a device? Where does technology stop and humanity begin? Today, we gather at ITHRA on the precipice of a digital wellness revolution and an evolution of humanity and technology converging. We gather to ask the important question of who is responsible for the future, of protecting our most vulnerable minds in the generation that was born into a digital playground. Is it us? Is it big tech? Or is it the government? Today I stand here as a digital native and a representative of the hundreds of millions of young people that engage in the digital world every single day. I still remember the first time that I downloaded social media. Like a moth to a flame, my brain was never the same. What started as a blue light of wonder, awe, and joy quickly slipped into a dungeon of dissonance and darkness. My feed began to play on my deepest vulnerabilities. I started to see content of young children promoting suicide, body image content that led me to anorexia, and I almost ended my own life because of the very device that was in my pocket. I was spending between 10 and 12 hours a day on that phone, which over a lifetime is 30 years. So what do we do about it? I realized in my darkest moment that as a young person, I had to have a consciousness shift, that no amount of drugs or sleeping would ever change my mental well-being if I did not reckon with the role that technology played in my story. So then I began to get curious. How was technology going to impact the future of generations? So I started to ask. That little idea 9 years ago was the beginning of the first nonprofit dedicated to digital wellness with young people at the forefront. Half the Story now leads an evidence-based education program rooted in play and creativity for young children around the world. We also bring youth voices to the forefront of policy to ensure that in every room where a decision is being made about them, they are there and they are heard. Now, today we're here to address who's responsible. Where do we go from here? But before we do, I must address what's happening in the modern narrative as we consider this equation. The scientific narrative. Is social media the cause of the mental health crisis we are living in? Or is it merely just correlated? Every time I go into a policymaker's room, I often like to show these two graphs. One shows the growth of 0 to a billion users on social media. The other shows the amount of mental health issues, suicide, self-poisonings that has happened amongst young women within that very same period. While scientists are debating about this issue, what I can assure you is that this picture tells us that technology has played some role in human evolution and development. Now, let's talk about policy. As I stand here talking about how social media impacted my life, we know that a new generation is growing up and will be the first natives in the AI revolution. Technology is rapidly accelerating faster than legislation. And on a global stage, we haven't come to a consensus with how we're dealing with it. And therefore, AI has become the new arms race. So what do we do about this? We have America where we haven't passed a bill in 30 years, as you heard before. And so now states are taking this into their own hands to protect their children. But what makes a child in California more valuable than a child in Idaho? And what does it look like to live in a world where technology and TikTok is taken away? What I want us to all consider here is that it might be bigger than all of this, and that we need to consider the role of the human spirit in this consciousness revolution, the fourth turning of humanity and technology all at once. As you leave today, I implore you to ask, what are you willing to leave behind for the sake of innovating for the future? On the role of regulation, I'd like to invite my esteemed panelists to come join me to discuss this very important tension in our modern world. First up, Andy Shabilsky, who is a professor of human behavior and technology at the University of Oxford. Next up, is Amy Blankson, the co-founder of the Digital Wellness Institute. And last, but certainly not least, Aisha Piatti, the managing director at Reg Horizon and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology at ETH Zurich. So I've already mentioned the what and the why we need regulation in this modern time, but as we spoke about in preparation for this session, how do we move from a world that is building policy based on reaction and move into policy based on prevention?
Well, I'll start by saying, I'm sorry for my voice. I think that this requires us to think very carefully about whether or not we want to react to technology and to our fears and kind of anecdotes and kind of things that might frighten us, or if we want to approach technology in a more proactive way, in a way that allows us to articulate our values and then test, kind of with the data that these companies generate, whether or not the changes that they make to platforms that we impress upon them, whether or not these changes actually improve the well-being and the thriving of young people. And I think that that's a fairly fundamental shift from reaction to a proactive stance.
And part of that shift is conscious collaboration and actually developing frameworks that brings policymakers, scientists, and engineers to the table. Can you talk a little bit about the frameworks that you've seen working, not only with social technologies as we know it, Aisha, but also as AI is unfolding right before us? What's working? What do you think needs to change?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And first of all, it's a great pleasure for me to be here, so thanks for the invitation. So I do think today, when it comes to regulation, we really do have one of the biggest challenges that we face as a society. We have a very, very fast-moving technology. We have systems that are set up with regards to regulation which are not necessarily up to the mark, I would say, in terms of how we need to respond. So a lot needs to be done. Now today, AI, of course, is the forefront of these technologies, and we're having so much happening in that area. And what I can say is that we are scrambling to find the right solutions. I think we should not, we should say things how they are. Now, there are some jurisdictions in the world that have started to, move forward with something which is much more binding in terms of regulation. And EU comes to mind, and they've put in place many things like the DSA, the EU AI Act. But there are many others which are not necessarily there yet. Now, whilst I think on a geopolitical level we have things to do, what is most important is who is really in that debate. And what I would like to highlight here is that we see that on the one hand, you have, yes, the policymakers who are trying to do something. You have the industry, essentially the big tech, which is always on the table. But when you look at other stakeholders, youth, for example, right? Parents, we heard about, this morning, which was so moving. Citizens, customers, are they really there on those discussions? And I think the answer is maybe not as much as they should be. And the last thing is, even from a geopolitical level, we did a study actually at ETH, and we were looking at every single sort of policy mechanism that is out there, and where did it come from? And we realized there's a large part of the world, which is maybe Africa, Central Asia, as well as Latin America, that is not really participating in this debate. And my one thing is, we need to work together, because this is a really, really big issue, and it needs everybody to be activated.
I love that you just highlighted the amount of global consensus that is required, and that it's not only about moving forward, but also reflection. Yeah. One of the biggest challenges, or two, in policy right now is that, one, there are no real incentives to actually make changes within tech platforms. But we might perhaps be able to look at other challenges, like the environmental crisis, and think about tax cuts and apply them to this industry. On the flip side, we're also not measuring the impact of these policies and what the financial cost is to these institutions. One of the things that I particularly love about the work that the Digital Wellness Institute is doing is that you're going in and making macro-level changes and teaching companies about why and how this is not only good for humanity, but also business. Amy, can you tell us a little bit more about the quantification or qualification of digital flourishing and how that applies on a global scale?
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Larissa. And again, I'm happy to be here as well and to represent some of the work that the Digital Wellness Institute has been doing on this front for the past 6 years, really looking at the companies who are leading the way and doing the best job of creating digital balance for their employees. And one of the things that we've learned is that many companies will talk a big game about how important people are to their organization. But if you look at the engagement surveys that the companies are using on a yearly basis, I have yet to find a company who asks a single question about the impact of technology on its people. There might be a quarterly survey on mental health, in which case one question might be devoted to this. But the reason why the Digital Wellness Institute is calling this the missing metric is because in the last 4 years, since the start of COVID to now, there's been a 30% increase in the amount of time that workers are spending behind screens. We all thought this would change change after the pandemic went away. And in fact, we found that those levels have remained elevated. So a 30% shift in the way that we're going about work, which is impacting relationships, sleep, productivity, the way that we connect with one another at work, and yet not a single question on our engagement surveys that connects back to why we see so much burnout, why we're seeing decreased engagement levels. And so I think this is part of how we're aiming to quantify the missing metric by pointing to some real life questions that we can be asking to proactively begin to address this in real time.
Well, the missing metric is also that we are missing the metrics of measurement, and what gets managed is what gets measured, which for the work that you're doing is so critical. And tomorrow, for those of you that have the opportunity to stay with us, you'll hear from the Inspired Internet Pledge, which is an initiative that started in America to help get more tech companies together to actually make changes within their platforms, but also their means of measurement. Because as technology and humanity converge, we have to be thinking differently, to your point, about the emotional impact of our technology, not just the quantifiable impact on the bottom line of the business. And so that brings me, Andy, to my next big question. I know that you've done an immense amount of work spending your day in labs, really going between the data, the people that have been impacted, but also big tech. And from a regulation perspective, what are some of the biggest obstacles that researchers are facing to actually get to the bottom of this equation?
Okay, so I think easily the biggest obstacle, either to understanding the basic links between kind of how we use technology and how it impacts us, is a lack of access to data. And when I say that, it isn't to imply that there's a big vault that Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos is sitting on top of, that's all the data that we would need to finally get good regulation sorted. It's a bit more subtle than that, because as you said, these companies, they exist for the very specific reasons of making money or pleasing shareholders and possibly providing a positive experience for end users. But this type of decision, it kind of bakes into even how these companies think about their own data. They don't think about their data in terms of what might they learn about the health and the well-being of their platform or their users. They think about it in terms of engagement metrics, the kinds of things that might relate to ads or to time on platform. But this isn't necessarily the building blocks that I or someone like me would need to kind of really figure out, well, what are the features and the affordances and the algorithms that might promote or might undermine the well-being of a user. And so it's not necessarily, I mean, the lawyers are quite aggressive. They do put up many obstacles, and that can't be undersold or understated. But actually, we need to think very carefully about, well, what is the data that we would want as scientists? If we really thought that we wanted to make platforms safer for, say, young users, what would we need to learn? What would those Lego be? What would those raw material be for kind of maximizing well-being in kind of a scientifically grounded way, in a way that's very different than either the anecdotes, which I as a parent, and we all have positive and negative ones, but also kind of on the other end of it, like if we really wanted to go beyond that to understand what's happening and to intervene, we need to articulate kind of a different standard for what we could study.
Thank you. As we think about changing technology, and Aisha, this is important coming from your side of the work, we have to also consider that digital equity is a core component of this, and that digital wellness must be looked at as the fourth leg of this digital equity stool, so that as we are providing access to technology, we are not deepening the inequities that exist. And as AI comes to the forefront, we're already starting to see how some of these inequities perpetuate through the different features that these platforms are unleashing. And what is your perspective on how we can reduce the inequities or the biases as we're thinking about AI through conscious collaboration?
Right. So I think, thank you, for that question. Indeed, it's very true that AI, there is the other side of the argument that says, well, you know what, these inequities are already there. So, what's the big deal? Why are we talking about the fact that AI is there and it's doing it? And bias is already in the society, we're just seeing it. I think the differentiation I would make is that what AI really does, it magnifies this bias at scale. So that's the first differentiation that we should all make and realize that yes, you can, if there is some discrimination happening due to a biased algorithm, if it is in a contained, that's okay. But when it becomes AI, it's going to be really at scale. So that's the big risk, and I think that's for those that are now. In terms of what has been done about it, I do think that there is movement. So we have good things that are happening. So it's not all like nobody's doing anything. We have propositions that are coming from the policy angle in terms of how we can potentially even use AI itself to take away some of the biases, right? So we have algorithms that are in fact able to identify some of them and take them away and make sure. The second thing is, of course, we're looking at policy frameworks as well, but we're also looking at solutions that are coming out of the academia, for example, right? So where am I going with this? What I'm saying is, we do need the solutions to happen. Things are on their way, but more certainly, we need more and more innovation in this area. We need more, and innovation has to happen when you get all the different voices that are going to be involved in this, right? So yes, we are moving forward. The last thing I would say is that global international organizations have a role to play in this as well, when you look at sort of equity across the board. Now, the fact that we don't have a big part of the population around the world which doesn't even have access to internet, of course, is a big problem, and we're talking about AI and algorithms. But the second thing is that, I think there was, with the ChatGPT, it was very clear that this thing became pretty much at the top of the agenda, at least in 2023, at a political level in many parts of the world. And that allowed us to have initiatives such as the G20, the G7, as well as the United Nations now, if you probably know, is also heading this UN Digital Global Compact. And one of the main aims of that is to make sure that we are inclusive and we get this equilibrium in terms of making sure that the benefits of these technologies, and we know in terms of profits of the big tech, I mean, there's very, very much, are also then equally distributed to not only within society, but also in terms of looking at it in international. So there is work being done. But I think we need to keep the eye on the ball, and we need to make sure that at the local level as well, at a country level as well, in Switzerland we have communes as well, we're looking at that issue and focusing on it.
Thank you for sharing. And in sum, what you so brilliantly highlighted for us is that technology is a social determinant of health. And we need to ensure that everyone has access. At the World Economic Forum, that was the first thing that you saw when you drove in. But as I mentioned earlier, that we're scaling access without actually scaling those harms. And in light of this conversation, because we don't have a teenager on stage, and that's who I spend the majority of my time with, I do just want to bring to light that the majority of conversations surrounding AI and innovation and the future tend to leave young people behind. And when we looked at what the greatest issues were with cyberbullying, for example, in the social media era, all that is changing now with deepfakes being the new mean comment. And the speed at which a deepfake can travel can be far and beyond faster and have far and beyond more repercussions for young children. And while that is a negative, and we must acknowledge it, on the flip side, and Amy, this comes back to you, these kids are going to have to deal with AI. It's not going anywhere. It's not, is AI going to be gone or stay? This is like being in the 90s and asking if a domain is going to be a part of the internet. And so with that, and a lot of this turning of consciousness and humanity, our work is very much so rooted in play, creativity, getting kids to think about the things beyond AI and technology that remain to be human, or how you can use AI to actually perpetuate positive consciousness, entrepreneurship, and learning. And so Amy, you talk a lot about the role of positive psychology in changing relationships with technology on an individual, a community level, and a societal level. Tell us more about what that looks like in practice.
So the reason I've really leaned into this flourishing model has been that when you watch documentaries like The Social Dilemma, you get to the end of the documentary, and it has a very important message. But then you freeze and you start to feel disempowered, thinking that the whole world is dictated by puppet masters who control our fate. And what I, as a positive psychologist, a happiness speaker, is really want to lean into is the sense of human agency, that no matter how much big tech does control so many of the aspects that have created the technology that we use today, we are not with that power. We as individuals have both consumer power as well as behavioral power to change the way that we interact with technology. And so the flourishing model came out of research that we had done at the Digital Wellness Institute to identify all of the many harms that come along with the digital era. And then we applied a positive psychology framework over it, looking at the traditional flourishing models for human flourishing, and began to look at what could a more digitally balanced, digitally flourishing society look like. And I think that's where a lot of us get stuck, actually, is we think, okay, I know all the problems, but what would it look like if I was truly thriving in the digital era? And so what we did was we actually began to cast a vision across 8 different pillars of wellness, looking at productivity, environment, communication, mental health, physical health, relationships, digital citizenship, and quantified self. And I think I repeated one in there. But the 8 different domains really focus on casting a different vision across multiple aspects of our lives, that you can begin to recognize, oh, I might be doing really well with productivity today, but maybe my mental health is a little bit suffering. So I'm going to reallocate my mental energy and resources to bolstering those behaviors. And I think when we can recognize within ourselves when we're not flourishing, we begin to see, okay, this is when I feel my best. This is when I'm doing the best in my life.
I love that you frame it that way, because for so many children, if we introduce them to technology and only introduce it through the lens of fear, that leads to apathy, which for me, people ask what you're afraid of. I firmly believe we can't save the world through fear, but apathy is the one thing that I fear most when dealing with children, because a lot of times, like I did myself, they're numbing their emotions in their screen, and the opportunity cost of that is their emotional wellness. So giving them a framework to improve their digital wellness on that spectrum is so critical. But I also just want to highlight that what you all have created is something that we use within all the societies that we work with at Half the Story, and it's actually been a very clear way that we can incorporate and measure the health of a student population, and that it isn't all doomsday. Yes, there are many of those horrible cases that we see, but we want to ensure that we're optimizing for strengths-based solutions while also acknowledging the negatives. I saw you nodding your head a little bit during the social dilemma. As a researcher, I'm curious. Right now, I spoke about this a little bit earlier. There's a lot of different schools of thoughts right now as to how to best tackle this. Data is at the core of this, and it is part of the policy conversations, but not all of them. What are some of the biggest changes that you would like to see beyond getting access to data as a researcher that would allow for global collaboration?
I don't know. So I think that films like The Social Dilemma are very interesting. And I say this as a scientist, but also as a parent, because I do have the same sense of kind of, not apathy, but helplessness or hopelessness, and a sense of, feeling afraid. And I think that, insofar as works like this get our attention, maybe they're useful. But, speaking as a psychologist, I tend to think that negative emotions like that, they're very good at focusing and maybe taking action, running away from a bear or something. But they're not very good for long-term survival. They're not very good for kind of understanding your environment and being able to be adaptive and adaptable. And certainly it's completely useless if you're then a parent, because then your options are very limited in terms of, say, some form of digital abstinence. And so I think that as we approach policy nationally and internationally, it's really important for us to understand that this isn't the first time that we've had this conversation. I'm sure that you've all seen in the last month or so a lot of seemingly new ideas about how to deal with the digital world. Not using a phone until a certain age, not using platforms before a certain age, not allowing phones in schools under any circumstances. None of these are new ideas. In fact, every single one of these ideas has been tried in different cultural milieus at different times. For a decade, the South Koreans turned off the internet for under 18s between midnight and 6 a.m. It took them 10 years to figure out that none of the KPIs around digital well-being were met. Massive human rights implications in terms of information, and they saved less than 2 minutes of sleep and no change in test scores. A place like China, sometimes people think, a parent who maybe watches The Social Dilemma, we wish we would have a government that would limit our kids to playing for 3 hours a day, 3 hours a week of video games. We find out 3 years later, through what little data comes out of China, that there's absolutely no change in the amount of time that anyone spends playing games. Great ideas around limiting screen time. The American Academy of Pediatrics, for more than 20 years, no screen time for under 2 years old, no more than 2 hours of screen time for those who are older. That's the rule of the land in the United States when it comes to being a good parent around technology. But they found out in 2016, eventually there was enough literature reviews that showed that no, these inflexible rules don't work. You know, there's an academic paper, the title is Virtually Impossible, because of the position that it puts parents in terms of thinking about technology in terms of time and restriction. And so I would say that, you know, even an idea, and I'll give one more, I'm sorry, this idea that banning phones in schools will solve anything. I grew up in New York in the 1980s, before kind of not retiring, but moving to the UK for quite a long time. But in the school district where I went to school, beepers were allowed, and then they were banned. Regular mobile phones were allowed, and then they were banned. Oh, sorry, then beepers were re-allowed. Mobile phones were banned. Then mobile phones were reintroduced. Then smartphones were banned. Then smartphones were reintroduced. And now we're talking about the 5th incarnation of heads of school and teachers kind of doing these things. So my plea to all of you, besides, and to regulators, is to not repeat the mistakes of the past, to bother learning about the fact that while a restriction might feel good, it might sound like it's easy to implement, not only will it be ineffective, it will also waste resources that could be better spent on evidence-based policies, the kinds of conversations, like Steve said earlier, like in terms of actually starting a conversation about technology earlier, and kind of having that advice and that two-way communication being based in scientific evidence. That way, it can be tweaked as we learn new things and as new platforms, like generative AI platforms, come into our children's lives, so that we can constantly revise the kinds of advice that we're giving and the regulations that we're trying to make, because we know that abstinence doesn't work. And just repeating that again, it's just going to waste everyone's time.
I'm glad that you brought that to light, because for so many children, there is a double standard where they're walking into their schools, the schools are taking their iPhones, and then they're handing them an iPad and saying, you have to submit your tests, you're going to get your score in 2 seconds, and all of their anxieties are still heightened. And for many of them, they're breaking through the VPNs and accessing all of the sites that their teachers and parents don't want them to have. And so one of the big things that we've been focusing a lot on is how do we go beyond that screen time or that scowl mentality, when the reality is that for all of you that have parents up here, not all children are the same. They're built differently. They're emotionally predisposed to different things. I was predisposed to anxiety and depression. So it's no doubt that giving me a screen amplified all of those things. I know that also the Digital Wellness Institute, you all are in the same camp as us, and thinking about screen time is more nuanced. And there's a difference between passive tech consumption and active tech consumption. And it's the idea of applying mindfulness to the digital age. Can you talk a little bit about that and the strategies, not only from a children's perspective, but also from a community and corporate lens?
Oh, I love that question. And I was thinking about this because I do have 3 teenagers, and I've tried all of the different tactics on them. They are my little guinea pigs. But I would say that of all the interventions from various apps I've tried, screen time limits, ruling on 2 hours of entertainment-related screen time, the #1 most effective strategy that I've come across is talking about digital wellness nonstop with them. I mean, those children can repeat every talk I ever give on digital wellness. And I think that having that talk track in their minds is one of the most powerful tools. I see the same thing happen in corporations. We'll often work with organizations to create communication charters. And this is an opportunity for a small team to actually get together and talk about why they're communicating, how often they're communicating, what channels they're going to communicate on, and even the most digitally well organizations we work with still have upwards of 12 different ways of communicating, whether it's Slack and Teams and Zoom and email and text message and in-person and phone, and the list goes on. And so what happens is that you have different modalities. You've got different genders, ages, industries, and regions of the world, which all have a different definition of what it means to be responsive. Some think being responsive means responding in 15 minutes. Others think that it's upwards of a week. So you put these two individuals on a team together, they both think they're being responsive and responsible, and they're very frustrated with one another. Turns out one of the most effective solutions is not adding yet another meditation app to help them with their digital well-being. It's having a conversation, a facilitated conversation with your manager about how you're communicating, why you're communicating, and what the frustration points are. I think this goes back to being human and the importance of actually having the conversation and not just talking about the problems that we're having and having conversations. And I think that we can do a lot in this space to continue to improve, specifically from a corporate level, but also from a societal and parental level as well.
Yeah, and could I just add something, build on a couple of things that you've said already, which I think make a lot of sense. One on the positivity and the mindset change, right? So, and the other is what do we do next? So first and foremost, I really, and I say that whenever I go around, we are at an incredible moment in history where we have a real opportunity right now that policy is being made. You know, in many industries, policies, regulations are already there. So you have to comply with the law. Now we are in a situation where we can help make those legislations, right? So I find this is an incredible opportunity which each of us can seize in a positive way, right? The other thing is when you realize that it's an opportunity, this mindset which says, well, you know what, I mean, this is not good, that is not good, but regulators have to deal with it. I mean, you go to across the board and you always say, well, regulation will come and they will deal with it. But no, actually, regulators are also people like us, right? They're also waiting to get input from all of us for what's the best solution. And that builds to what, Antti was saying before as well, this communication, coming back to that, right? This constant feedback like we give. I'm a proud mother of twins as well, and it's exactly the same story where you've got to talk to them and explain to them. And once you do, they actually understand. And in fact, as a society, I do believe if we do that, right, for lawmaking, and I think there can be no better process than lawmaking where you can actually discuss these trade-offs together, right? Because that's what it's all about, right? Is it going to be competition or is it going to be privacy that we want in this society? I mean, is it going to be long-term or short-term? What are the trade-offs? And the same way we discuss with our kids, we should be discussing these issues, but we need to highlight what those trade-offs are and then discuss as a society. And lawmaking is something that allows us to have that cadre, as we say in French, but the box in which we can do that in a neutral and good way. And what I would say is so that communication, that collaboration, that positive mindset is what we need, not just for the children, but actually generally as a whole. And that's what my wish would be that we do more of.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of stripping away the technology and bringing more humanity to the table. We could certainly use that in every room where policies are being designed. So on our last note, I'd love to ask a rapid fire question of if you had a magic wand and you could add or subtract one feature on a platform, what would it be?
I can jump in. I've got an idea. So if we're talking about social media platforms, one idea that I would love to see is to have some sort of overlay of digital wellness coaching, especially on social media. So you've been on for a little while. It might be worth stepping away. I noticed that there have been some negative comments on your post. Would you like to handle this or get some coaching to work through this? So somebody, at least prompts that would help to connect somebody to a healthier way of processing what we're seeing in social.
Love that. Okay, I have maybe one. I think, as everybody, I mean, many people know, algorithms are there to sort of put us and show us more of what they believe we like to see, right? So more and more that happens. If I could actually have a wish, my wish would be that I should be shown on a social media something opposite to the general algorithms which I actually have as what they should be showing me. So something different, which allows me to go outside of my sort of world and see what the other world is like, right? And now I know it doesn't make a lot of money for the big tech if we do that, but that, I think, will help me to see what's happening in discussions outside of my realm, which could be maybe helpful and which I should be listening to. So that'd be my wish.
It's never been more important than to break out of your echo chamber than now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a really interesting experience sometimes, which is I'll talk to people who work in tech firms, quite senior, junior, doesn't matter. And I've actually seen them on many different occasions ask exactly this question. But these are the people who are kind of, in their own way, holding a magic wand, because they do have, to different levels of experience and power and technical capability, the ability to change their platforms. And so, you know, you can see this in two ways, or I've seen this in two ways, one private and one public. In private, they will very excitedly talk about some of these things, kind of the productization or the toolization of ways of making their platforms better, ways of not recommending certain things, promoting other things, kind of reflecting their internal values. The second way that I've seen this is the magic wand. We actually can see this in the Facebook files, the Facebook leaks from Frances Haugen back in August of 2021, where you can actually see through leaked documents, more than 21,000 leaked documents, all the different ways that Facebook and Instagram engineers and researchers were trying to get a hold of digital well-being. And you can see all of their magic wands too. You can see a lot of their interventions. And so we've gone through these documents, and we've seen now that they did 36 studies out of these 21,000 documents, and actually 5 intervention studies. So there's 5 examples of them waving their magic wand. And some of them worked, some of them became products, some of them didn't work, but still became products. And I think that this is happening at a time where actually we have more power as users. And when we talk about the social web and the federated social web, there are already very interesting experiments. And what's happening is people are being able to use their magic wands outside of the tech company proper, but inside of the way that platform is governed. Yeah. So if you look at the platform Blue Sky, you can actually, it's like Twitter, it spun out a long time ago, you can actually add your own algorithms. You can curate your own algorithms in such a way that my Blue Sky is different than yours and yours. Not in that we've been driven down some digital rabbit hole, but actually that we can select for positive content. It's like an app store for this type of thing. But it's not an app store controlled by the platform. It's an affordance for us as users. And so my magic wand is out there, and I think it should happen with other platforms.
The shift from the digital rabbit hole to the digital oasis.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. As we are at this critical turning point, not only in technological innovation, but human consciousness, it's clear that we need to have humanity at the forefront of these platforms, shifting from vocabulary of user experience to human experience and building in every sense of the way, backed by data. Thank you for joining me, and let's give our incredible panelists a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Go.
It's clear the questions raised by this session do not have easy answers. And personally, I think it's really hard and tough for a lot of parents to deal with their children's digital well-being. So I would like personally to thank Clarissa and the rest of the panelists for bringing such a sensitive topic. And the next session promises to be equally challenging. To guide us through, it gives me a great pleasure to bring back to the stage Mo Gaudat, back again to moderate this upcoming session to discuss misinformation and the well-being opportunity. Joining him will be Lama Al-Hamawi, journalist, Arab News, and Prof. Chanel Curry, Chief Executive Officer, Media Done Responsibly. Ready?
Hello, hello. You're still here. Thank you for being here. This is a topic that I have to say is very important to my heart. So I haven't prepared very well, which I think is the lovely part of being the moderator, because I'm going to do very little talking. But very curious about misinformation, disinformation, and what's happening in our world when it comes to what I call the end of the truth. Now, fake news is nothing new, but it seems that we're hitting the era of fake news on steroids, where deep fakes and technology and the bias of algorithms of social media can lead us to places where it's actually becoming really difficult to know what's real and what's not. And when you look at the implications of that, it just takes us into very dark places in terms of hate, in terms of discrimination, in terms of really creating a big divide between us humans in ways that probably is not the best for a human society. So I want to jump in right away and start maybe with you, Lama.
Sure.
When you're a journalist, so in the good old days of journalism, the whole idea was being proud to provide an objective and accurate story, right? This is becoming very difficult nowadays. Have you personally been exposed to, or do you know in your work of people, of journalism being affected by fake news or misinformation or disinformation?
I'm glad that you brought up this point. You're completely correct. Misinformation isn't something new. I mean, we've had it. I can't speak from personal experience, but before the digital age, obviously misinformation was present, even in text, even in print journalism. And it can be sourced from multiple reasons. I mean, it's not always intentional. It can even be sourced from, even in conducting an interview. For example, the interviewer, the journalist could mishear someone, they could misunderstand someone, and that could lead to it being published and it being misinformation. A personal experience? No, I haven't. I mean, I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but I haven't.
No juicy stories?
No, not personally. So for me, I know a lot of news outlets prioritize being first. For me personally, as a journalist, I do work for Arab News, and we do prioritize accuracy and being first. But personally, my priority is accuracy. I work in politics, I work in foreign affairs, so it's very sensitive. I have to make sure every detail is precise. So personally, no, I haven't experienced like writing in misinformation. But we have. I mean, the case that I've seen most recently with a fellow journalist from another news outlet was misinterpreting the interview. So sometimes when you're listening to someone, if you don't directly quote them, you paraphrase. And that paraphrasing, if you paraphrase it incorrectly, leads to misinformation. Misinformation leads to misunderstanding. And then it skews the trust that people have in media over the long run. I hope that answers your question. I mean, there's a lot we could talk about.
Do you think we should mistrust media?
Do I think we should mistrust media? I mean, I work in media, so I hope not.
I'm asking, so yeah.
No, I don't think you should have a mistrust of media. I think you should have, with anything around the world, we should be skeptical. Okay, we should always be skeptical. I know this is not something people want to hear. Do your own research, gain a better understanding. At times you do have to have a certain level in media, but that comes over time. It's our job to also build trust with people. We're not always 100% accurate as journalists. We do the best that we can. If you're a journalist and you're following the correct path of journalism, you want to be an accurate source. You want to be a trusted source. You want to provide information that people can trust around the world remotely, that they can seek. And that comes over time by building trust. So I hope people can trust the media, but again, have a level of skepticism with like everything else in the world.
I love that. I think that's a word of honesty said very, very well. Chanel, you lead an organization that's called Media done responsibly.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
media done responsibly.
So the name assumes that it's not done responsibly all the time, but also that it can be done responsibly. So can you tell us a bit about what you do and why you do it?
Absolutely. Media done responsibly is essentially about social responsibility in the media. And when I look at the word responsibility, I don't just look at it in terms of accountability, but we take a look at it deeper, our ability to respond, right? Who has the ability to respond to the media, to social issues, and the ways in which they're being represented. Originally, I started off as an organizer of a campaign. So I'm at the intersection of digital literacy and media literacy, digital wellness and digital well-being, as well as social justice and love. And I started with a campaign of young people who were tired of, in particular, this was before we started Media Done Responsibly, but in particular, the ways in which women of color were represented in media and in music videos. And so there was a hypersexualization, and these were the only ways that they were able to see themselves represented in the media. And so when we started talking about social responsibility and media that's done responsibly and accuracy, we want to go deeply into, are we just looking at a single story? Are we looking at a stereotype? Can we get beyond that stereotype and look at the full human being, and what does that mean? And so going back into this view of transparency, making sure that we are accessing the full lives and lived experiences of humanity, as opposed to kind of our lower, quicker nature, what is going to be salacious, what's going to get a bunch of eyes. And just kudos to you for the work that you do in maintaining proper journalism. A lot of times, the role of the journalist was very close to the heart of the citizen, right? Like we could have that trust to turn on the news or to open a newspaper and to see what the story is that's going to impact our lives. And a lot of times I think, especially now in social media and people wanting to get clicks and views, a lot of times, not necessarily with journalists who have been properly trained and, but sometimes other people who are not official journalists will put out information that's not correct and create salacious headlines. And so part of our work is to train the community to look at that, find out who the source is. Is this coming from a legitimate news source? How can I find out more information to let me know that this is accurate information as opposed to misinformation or even a disinformation campaign?
Do you believe that misinformation and disinformation are affecting polarization, are affecting racism, are affecting misogyny, and so on and so forth? Give us a bit of an example on that, because in reality, you could actually think that these are things that are underlying currents in the society that are actually reflected on misinformation and disinformation. Is it that way, or is it actually increasing our polarization?
Right, that's an excellent question. When we look at racism, we'll just take that as an example. In some senses, racism is a form of polarization that has been built and sustained by misinformation and disinformation that's been sustained over time. I'm from the United States. African American folk and Black people who are there, many of us come from and are descendants of the African slave trade. And in order to maintain a system of dehumanizing and denigrating human beings, there had to be a campaign of disinformation about those humans.
Correct.
And a huge part of that disinformation campaign was that these are not humans at all. These are 3/5 humans. They cannot be citizens because they are not full human beings. They don't feel pain, so the torture that they're experiencing, they're not feeling at all. It is the God-given right of people who are oppressing them to oppress them, right? And so they're entitled to do that. All of that is this misinformation and disinformation that's been a part of society. And I think it's important for us to study the history of that, because now that it is playing out in our digital spaces, it's amplified, it's happening quicker. It is causing not just fear in a small group of people, but people all over the world are concerned about what's happening with AI, what's happening with the advancements in technology. Is our world going to change? Yes, it is changing. And so part of what I look at in the way that I frame this is, if I'd like to just posit, as our humanity evolves, and if it can evolve at a rate that is equal to the advancements in our technology, then we can begin to lay the foundation of digital wellness, of digital well-being, of digital flourishing.
That's such a beautiful way
So
of
if
saying it.
essentially our EQ, right, our emotional intelligence, can move at the rate of AI's intelligence, then we can then begin to lay this foundation and create a sense of equilibrium.
That's such an incredible way of looking at it, that our world is moving faster than our ability to be human is moving. I think that's really interesting. Kate, you also look at that in your work. So the idea that when we're misinformed, or misinformation and disinformation, will sort of almost break our humanity system and lead to hate and hate speech and so on. How does that work? Tell me a bit about your
So
work.
I love that you said what you said, because I'm just going to take that and make it bigger. So myth and disinformation, it fuels hate. And we have seen causality between myth and disinformation, then online hate speech, then offline hate speech. So if we take an example that feels innocuous, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, and we look at how hate speech intersected with that. So it started with conspiracy theories about the Chinese government, about 5G, about quite mad things that were completely illogical. And people really bought into that myth and disinfo because it was inspiring their fear. They want answers, they want someone to blame, and so they latch onto myth and disinfo to give them an answer. But what we found is that extremists latched onto those conspiracy theories, linked them with minority groups, and highlighted characteristics, cultural characteristics, religious behaviors in those groups to spread misinformation, suggesting that those groups had spread COVID-19. And what we saw was a direct correlation in hate crimes against those groups, against anyone from Southeast Asia, against Muslims, against black people, against everyone, anyone from any minority, because all of these extremists were galvanizing, leveraging this opportunity, this fear, this anxiety, to turn it into hate speech. So we saw hate speech happening online, and then we saw it happen offline. And there's been some amazing studies in the US and in Germany that have shown, for instance, when someone of extreme political power, for instance in the US, I won't name names, speaks about minorities in a way that is disrespectful or hateful, then hate crimes directly correlate, they increase. And I'm not talking about hate crimes online, I'm talking about hate crimes on the street. So there's a direct correlation, which is terrifying. That's the power of myth and disinformation and how it translates and turns into hate. And we just need to think about this dissemination of information. It's wonderful what you're doing in terms of educating. It's wonderful what the media are doing in terms of educating. But there's a lot more we need to do to keep up with the tech, because the tech is moving at speed and it's allowing people to share this information at speed, at scale, and it's prompting hate all over the world, to all minorities, to anyone with a protected characteristic. It's terrifying.
Yeah, actually, that's again very eye-opening. It's very intriguing as well, because when you see the problem this way in that scale, if you look down at the core of who I am, I'm a scientist. I want facts and figures and numbers, and right? And I'm completely being confused, because as you broaden your perspectives with all of the knowledge that comes in, take any topic like dieting and the diversity of all of the issues, and you can't actually make up your mind on what's true and what's not, right? But then when it comes to the way you ladies are describing it in terms of how it impacts on what it means to be human, on the ethics of humanity, on hate, on the, on polarization and so on, the topic is actually a lot more nuanced in terms of how we deal with it. So how do we deal with it? And I'll ask the expert, right? And I will have to ask a personal question. So I have a few people like yourself that I trust. So if you give me information, I will trust that information, or at least I will be open to receiving it from you. The problem is that the algorithm is not showing you to me all the time, right? There are those echo chambers, if you want. Like if I sort of either myself or the algorithm designer wants me to see things in a certain way, I'm not always going to see that. So even if you're trustworthy, you're honest in your reporting, how as a journalist can you overcome that? How can you make your word heard in a world where the digital algorithms are creating echo chambers?
The way I view echo chambers is there's two ways to kind of, I don't want to say resolve it, because it's very difficult to resolve. There's two ways to tackle it. There's the tactical, technical side from our friends that can help us over here. And then there's one that's more human-based. I think at times we overlook the power of just human-based connection, the sharing of information between people honestly, without an agenda, without the agenda of spreading propaganda. With these echo chambers, I don't know if everyone knows what an echo chamber are. I think some people may not know.
Yeah, go for it.
I think the best way to describe it is, I want to simplify it very simply in a way that people can kind of understand. Imagine you're in a group of friends, and all your group of friends share a similar mindset, similar values. So while you're having these discussions, you're all going to share the same result, and you're going to think the same way. Over time, that becomes an echo. So you're all talking. Your opinion becomes an echo, becomes louder, and at times it's so loud to where you can't even hear the other side, the other opinion, people that vary from you. So when you have these groups, and we call them echo chambers, I mean, we grew up learning polarization. We didn't, but now recently it's been called more of echo chambers, and that's been more broadly used. When we have these echo chambers between different groups, you're not hearing the other side. So if, I don't know, I want to give you an example. If I think this tissue box is like a square, and you come and you say, no, it's a circle. It's a cube, and you come and you say, no, it's a sphere.
Cylinder.
It's a sphere.
Okay, yeah.
And you're like, and you have a group of people echoing with you that it's a sphere, but I say, no, it's a cube.
I know.
We're not even listening to each other. Our echoes are so loud, we can't even sit down and say, well, let's just look at it.
Yeah.
Let's share opinions and figure out what is it actually.
You know, this happens online with the flat earthers very clearly. It's like it's a sphere, it's flat. Right?
I think if we have that discussion, we'll be here all day with the flat earthers. I could be here all day talking about that.
Yeah.
But no, this is the issue with echo chambers. We're not sitting down and discussing. So tactical side, technical side, I think you'd be better to explain it. But more human side, I think encouraging people, go back to the basics, the simple. You know, when we were in school, they taught us, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Sharing is caring. All these mutual lessons. Sit down and listen to someone. I might not agree with people, but I sit down and I listen to them so I can hear their perspective. I think when you break the barrier of these echo chambers, you're building diplomacy. It doesn't have to be within a political view, but I view it political. You're building diplomacy. You're strengthening understanding between people. And over time, that reduces hate speech. That reduces this perception that people have of each other. So go back to the basics. Listen to each other. Media's role in this is much more complicated. With us, is just showing up every day and being an accurate source of information. We're not going to force feed the people the information because that's not the role of media. Our job is not to force feed people information. The information is there. It's accurate. If you want to see it, come see it. But it goes down to human nature. Just tear down those barriers. I think technical side, you'd explain it better in terms of algorithms, the role of social media in creating and fostering these echo chambers. I think the technical side would be better.
I'm happy to step in.
Okay.
So I love what you said, because I think what's really important about this panel, that we're talking about the human experience and the technical solution. And the solution needs to be founded on human research. You know, tech can't operate alone. So there's two things we can do, I think, online to stop this. And it's pre-bunking and debunking. So pre-bunking is a proactive measure we can do to educate people. So I think we make an assumption. Everyone in this room is probably digitally native. You mentioned that you are, because you're young and have experienced the digital world. I'm in my 40s. I'm sort of half and half. But you know, you might have your young son, he's 11, he's seen something online, he's sharing it with his friends, and you think, how can you believe this? Or we've probably all got a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt who is sharing mis and disinformation, and you think, oh my God, how am I going to tell them that this is completely wrong, you're embarrassing yourself, etc. And I think pre-bunking helps with that. So it's about digital literacy. It's about teaching people to interrogate what they see online and understand that not everything they see is true. And we're not just talking about young and old people. We're talking about nations that are new to the digital ecosystem, people living in poverty, people with not access to mainstream education. You know, there's language barriers. There's all sorts of things. We have to be culturally aware when we think about these initiatives. So pre-bunking is something we can do. And I think pre-bunking is educating people about what tactics are used in mis and disinformation. So the tactics, and you talked about this really eloquently earlier, so I don't want to repeat you, but are things like emotional appeal, appealing to you emotionally, are scapegoating, so picking minorities and suggesting the ways that they're responsible for what you're experiencing, othering, creating polarization. And there's lots of tactics that can be used. And I think if we're aware of those tactics, we learn to be, as you mentioned, healthily skeptical about information. But lots of people aren't aware of this. So Google actually did a great thing on YouTube where they had these 90-second videos in their adverts that just very briefly explain the tactics. So they pre-bunked. So people were just scrolling through YouTube. We've all gone down a YouTube rabbit hole. I defy anyone to tell me that they haven't. And we start seeing content because of engagement algorithms and our negative bias. We keep seeing content that's more and more negative because it keeps us engaged, and that's what platforms want to achieve. So these engagement algorithms are keeping us engaged, and then YouTube stops in the middle and says, did you know that these tactics can be deployed to make you feel this and that way? And people are stopped in their tracks, and they go, oh. Now, these are like microdoses of information, because we've got short attention spans. We were talking about this earlier. So microdoses of information that allow us to go, hang on a minute. Now, we might not even know we've processed that information, but perhaps the next video we see is pre-bunked. We start thinking, hang on, I should be skeptical about this. And what AI can do very cleverly is it can target those vulnerable groups, those people who are from new to the digital ecosystem, young people, older people. It can target them with pre-bunking technology, with pre-bunking ideas, and tell them, be skeptical, this is how it works. And we can tailor that messaging to be appropriate to the culture, to the youth, the age, the environment. So it's really, really powerful. And I think we are afraid of AI, I know we are, but we can do it ethically. And I won't go on now, but if I can talk about ethical AI later, I will do.
I'd actually like to veggie back off of both of what you both said.
Amazing.
Just really the work that I do is what you're talking about in terms of digital and media literacy.
Amazing.
Making sure that young people of all ages, right? I'm forever 21, by the way. You all mentioned your ages, so just like the store. But whatever age we are able to think critically about all of the media that we're consuming and understanding the impact that it has on us. And so a big part of that is that healthy skepticism, or what we call critical thinking.
Yeah.
And not just taking the first thing that you've seen and running with it, or not even a lot of times getting a text message and you're sent, or a DM and you're sent an article and you just read the headline and you form an opinion based on that without going deeper. But really training, and I'll use the example of young people. I work with college students in the United States, in Southern California, and we train them to be media literacy mentors for middle school and high school students. And so what that does is it gives young people agency and power to tell these stories themselves, to think critically, and to hear that from one another, as opposed to some adult coming in and telling you, don't listen to this, right?
Amazing.
Or, saying, you should be thinking about this in this particular way. But we lead with curiosity. We ask the young people, what do you see? What do you think is going on here? Do you think that this is an ad or an article when we're talking about content in a what they might think is a magazine or a newspaper? Well, it's the New York Times, so it has to be a news article. Well, actually, no, it's an ad, right? It's a long ad that's made in the form of an article that's making you think that, but at the end of it, you're wanting to purchase something or you're wanting to watch something on television based on that. And so having an understanding of what the media is, it's a money-making organization, really, right? It's money-making. That's the goal. The goal is not necessarily always, depending on the specific purpose and function of that news article or news outlet or media outlet, it's not necessarily to be warm and fuzzy and support humanity, but that has to be our role. And part of the emotional quotient, the part of emotional intelligence is being self-aware and then being able to manage your emotions. So if I am on YouTube or if I'm on a platform whose algorithm is designed to make me want to stay on there by triggering my emotions of anger and of upset, of an uprising even, I can, one, be aware that this is triggering something within me. And the more I scroll and the deeper I go in it, the more I'm triggered and inflamed by this and yelling and wanting to take action and fired up. The second part of that is being able to manage those emotions. And part of that is having the skills and the tools to be able to do the research to look and find out, is this true? So if there's not this, a tool that pops up there for you saying, be mindful of you're about to go down this rabbit hole, that you within yourself have the skill and the ability to be able to do that. And that is power. And so when young people have that power, it's amazing. I met today on my right over here, the youngest podcaster in Saudi. I don't know if she's in the room right now.
Wow.
Yes. But she talked about how sometimes she gets hate on her social media platforms. And she said, you know what, you haven't really made it until you have some haters. And I just know to ignore them. And then if they continue, then I will give them information to let them know that I'm going to respond with love, that they're providing misinformation and disinformation. And I said, who is this 13-year-old, But 13 years old, breaking down practical steps to manage and deal with hate online.
I'm really interested in this because I think self-regulation is hugely important, but we have to inspire the platforms to regulate as well.
Oh, 100%.
And I hope you don't mind me jumping in here, but it's just
Love
so
it.
important.
This is the easiest job ever.
He doesn't want to do any work today. He already told us.
Totally.
So self-regulation is hugely important, but these platforms are designed to be addictive. They're based on gambling, many of them, the infinite scroll. I am addicted to TikTok, and I work in tech, and I work in global well-being. This is a problem, okay? So I can't always self-regulate, because the apps are designed to stop me doing so. And there are many tools that we can use as part of not only education that we can use, but I just also want to talk about another thing we can do, which is debunking, okay? So that comes after, that's like a reactive response to online hate. And I think if we can, so what that does is it says, this is what you've seen, this is not true. And this is happening across platforms. So I'm really pleased to say that people like Facebook and Twitter and TikTok have embraced this, surprisingly, because they care about engagement. They don't want to lose users. So what they've done is they've said, I'm just going to flag this is an untrue statement. They did this in COVID-19. Twitter does it to Elon Musk himself and flags his content as untrue, which is great because if you're a young person or all the people we talked about earlier, someone who's not digitally literate, the platform is flagging it for you. And young people trust these platforms, which is actually quite frightening. We were speaking about this earlier. So, okay, debunking works to let you know this is not true. Great. But it feels quite limited. I think there's more we can do. And I think it chimes in with some of the things you've said. And I want to talk about counter-speech. So the media uses counter-speech, which is fantastic. It says, here's a narrative, here's a different narrative. Let's not be biased, let's explore both. But we can use AI to deploy counter-speech automatically, which is insane and amazing. So Let's imagine a trigger event's happened. We've pre-bunked the trigger event. We've said this is going to happen. There's going to be the World Cup in Qatar. There's going to be the Eurovision Song Contest in Europe. There's going to be an election in America. You may see some information that will be mis or disinformation or promote hate. That's fine, everybody's aware. But then they start seeing this information. They're starting to think, I'm angry, I feel strong about this, blah, 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 blah. And then, what if we deployed counter-narratives? So what if I am someone who casually uses the internet, and I'm watching the World Cup, I'm a man, I'm watching the World Cup, and I'm annoyed that women are participating, and I start sharing misogynistic content. But I'm not wed to this misogyny. It's not my lifelong belief. I'm a treatable person. I can change my views with empathy, okay? What if AI deployed something that said, how do you feel if someone said that about your daughter or your wife? We have research that proves that this works 65% of the time, so that 65% of the misinformation online could go if we deployed this counter-speech. And how we do it is we triage users. We look at the ones who are non-treatable, the lifetime racist. He's a member of a society. We can't treat him. He's spreading the disinformation. He's the source. We can fingerprint him using AI. We can find where he is. But we can't treat him. He's not going to engage. But we can treat all the people sharing misinformation. We can say, hang on a minute. How would you feel? Hang on a minute. And we can shape those narratives. AI can learn to shape those narratives so they work. And AI, as you know, continually learns. So we can use machine learning. We can keep shaping those narratives to change the space. And imagine if we could get rid of 65% of misinformation online, how that would impact hate speech.
Amazing.
So I just think that's huge, and it's something that we should definitely be speaking about.
We have 2 minutes left, so I'd like to get a very short nugget of gold, okay? So we have the journalist, the educator, and the techie, okay? If you would give the audience one nugget of gold on what is the top tip to live in a world where there is so much misinformation and so much disinformation, what would that be?
A top tip, you said? I guess for the general public, I think deciphering between fact and opinion, and I think we hear it so often at times, and people don't know how to decipher. I'm bad at recollection, but I think there was a case study done by Oxford University. It was Reuters Institute, Oxford University, and it said that 20% of public figures, meaning politicians, celebrities, influencers, 20% of their posts during a time frame, it was during a conflict time frame, 20% of their posts had misinformation in it, but that 20% wasn't just 20%. It actually, their posts made up 70% of all social media interaction for that time frame. So those posts were circulating, whether it's through reposting on Twitter, whether it's reposting TikTok, commenting on it. So 70% of user interaction of posts was misinformation being spread at that time frame, all from 20% of public figures. Opinion for people, I mean, my tip, would be deciphering between what's fact and what's opinion. Look at it. Is it proven? Is it research-based? Can we trace it back to any studies? Or is it just a celebrity that I really like that said, this is happening, and then I reposted it because I like her, and now everyone that I follow thinks it's a fact. Please decipher. That would be my best advice.
Beautifully said.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Chanel.
Yes, beautifully said. I would say support media literacy and digital literacy education. Really advocate for that, because it's wonderful that we are in kind of an echo chamber of our own, right? Talking to where I'm from, we have a phrase, preaching to the choir, right? That means the choir already knows the sermon, right? But we're telling it anyway, but making sure that those who are outside of rooms like these have the tools and the access so that we can work in conjunction with technology that is doing good in the world. The other thing I would say is a big part of the work that I do is have civil dialogues, conversations with people who have polarized viewpoints. But it's not a debate. It's leading with curiosity, listening first, understanding that sometimes we have similar values, but we go about things in different ways. And it's okay if I have a difference than you have. I can hear you out, I can listen. I don't have to change my view. I might, but then I also speak authentically what my truth is, and we can understand the context of that. And what we find is when people don't have the defense mechanism of I have to prove my point and I have to win you over, I can just express who I am, I can express my ideas and thoughts and allow you to do that same in a non-judgment environment, then we more openly receive information, learn from others, oftentimes maybe shift our perspectives, kind of, work with some folks who were a bit more willing to shift and to change, and we can learn and work together in supporting that foundation of digital well-being.
Love that so much.
Kate, 1 minute.
Okay, so I would say, from my perspective as a corporate techie, I'm loving hearing from these perspectives. The human element is so important. Technology is your friend. Don't be afraid of it. There are many apps, many solutions you can use to limit your time online, to challenge mis and disinfo. Use technology. It's not your enemy. And I would say the hope that I have is that if we do deploy AI to pre-bunk and debunk, then we as humans might start doing it ourselves, because people are scared to engage online, right? We don't want to be cancelled. We don't want to fight. Like you said, there's not healthy conversations. They're not nuanced online. I don't get to say my piece and you say yours. I'm going rah, 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 and you're going rah, 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 and we're not listening, as you said earlier. But maybe if we see AI deploying counter-speech, we might be brave and deploy it ourselves. And then we're all engaging in healthier conversations online.
Lovely. I absolutely love this. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. My top tip is differentiate between words and actions. A lot of people around the world, especially where I lived in the corporate world, will tell you that they're doing certain things, but they're actually not doing it at all. I have not, in my 35 years in the business world, been in a panel that is all women teaching us so beautifully, so wisely. So well done, Saudi Arabia. This is it, doing what we say we're going to do. This is amazing. And I will tell you openly, this topic of end of the truth is really one of the top topics you should think about today. It really is going to shape your mind, shape your heart, shape your relationships with others, shape your relationships and perceptions of countries and communities and everything going forward. So make it your priority. I think we got massive tips today. I'm so grateful for what you shared. This is incredible. Thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What a great panel that was. Fascinating in learning how misinformation can obviously be a double-edged sword. Thank you to Mo, Gaudat, excellent moderator, Lama and Chanel and Kate for unpacking that all for us. We're going to dig a little deeper into the world of tech, specifically AI, a topic that obviously we're coming back to every so often today. And how it's already begun to quietly, or maybe not quietly, transform our world. We see it in so many various touch points. Concerns are rife, as we've already discussed today, but it's also questionable that AI holds a tremendous promise to be a force for good. So we have another panel starting now, which I will be moderating, where we will see the benefits to our digital lives in particular, and what safeguards are needed to ensure these developments continue. Again, safeguards is something that we heard in the beginning of the day with Kirsten's story, and let's dive a little deeper into that today. Helping me with this discussion, if I can introduce my three panelists, we have the Vice Governor of the Saudi Digital Government Authority, Mr. Nabil Al-Aufi. We have the Chief Executive Officer of Aramco Digital, Tariq Amin. And joining us via Zoom, we have the Deputy Director of, I'm going to try to get this right, Telecommunications Standardizations Bureau at the International Telecommunications Union, Bilal Jamousi. Welcome. So I think it's the first panel I've ever been involved in where we have two people in the flesh and someone joining by Zoom. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is going to be fun. Thank you all so much for being part of today's panel. A lot to discuss in the world of tech and AI. And if I can kick off with you, Ustad Nabil, as Vice Governor of Saudi's Digital Government Authority, you're obviously quite mindful of the risk elements of AI development. Question is, how do we safeguard its development to ensure that we are prioritizing the positive outcomes that can come out of the world of AI?
First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And let me put it in different paradigm. You know, the risk management is more, or the risks that we could face from the AI, we should think it as opportunity and how we can leverage from the AI. I will take the quote mentioned in the morning of one of those sessions. AI is about the efficiency. Yes, we are the people who build from innovative point of view what are the services that we could use and leverage from AI on that part. AI give us the efficiency where we go for a bigger landscape of managing that part. However, in each risk that we will see an opportunity that we can use definitely in order to leverage up the benefits that we could have for the organization. As we see in the government, we are investing heavily on building the strategy of the AI, and we put it in the 3 milestones. The first milestone, from risk point of view, that we need to think about is to build the capabilities. And the capabilities mean building the infrastructure, building the know-how, in order to assure that we manage the risks that we could face from the bias that we could have on the algorithm that we put in the AI, which may lead us to wrong decision-making at the end. So how are we going to manage that? How to assure that we have the human factor in place, where we need to question any answers that we could receive from any AI solution, and we need to analyze, is that the right direction that we to do in place? The second part is to put the priority of main 5 pillars that we need to focus on: health, education, transportation and logistics, and government services, and all those kind of things that we need to invest heavily in terms of the AI. The third stage, where we will go exponentially, where we will go heavily on to be a pioneer in the world in building the AI. This should be built on the risk-based part, and the priority should be more in localizing the knowledge and localizing the content, because we and our national young people that we have in place, they are the best to know what the things that we need to do that benefits our ecosystem in place and benefit the world, inshallah.
Thank you for that. Tariq, you're renowned within the industry for your bold approach in revolutionizing markets, disruptive technologies. In your most ambitious and optimistic moments, how would you like to picture the positive effects of AI on society in general?
Great question. First of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's amazing to be here with everyone to talk about such an important topic. Maybe before I answer, I just want to give everybody the life journey that I've been through, because it really addresses the heart of this technology transformation that we're embarking on. I would say, in generally, I've been really blessed to experience not just only successes, but really many failures that made me who I am today in my professional life. Moving from Jordan to US, from US to India to build a new digital platform company, from India to Japan to here. You know, one thing I've learned is how inquisitive we are as humans. You know, we're always looking at new things, new explorations, new opportunities to invent. And if you really track from the early 1800s when telephony was invented, to computers, to internet, to new age industrial revolution, we've witnessed amazing progress in technology. But I must tell you, nothing is compared to what we are going through now. So the introduction of AI in our life, whether you are in consumer world, business, or anything that you do day to day, no doubt the world is changing. And the one thing I will tell you is the pace of innovation And the pace of advancements in this technology is absolutely mind-boggling. It is happening at a pace that I have not witnessed at any time before. The amount of investments that private companies are putting, both public side, government side, it shows clearly we have really discovered a great opportunity. Me personally, I'm excited to see what AI is doing in our line of business. So I moved to Saudi Arabia to hit up a new startup that is owned 100% by Aramco Digital. We have a clear vision that we really want to be in the forefront of digital transformation to enable societies and businesses to leverage this technology. So when this vision was established, we thought about, okay, well, what are the really enabling pillars that we need? So we looked at really 3 fundamental areas that were really critical that linked our approach in Aramco Digital with what's happening largely with 2030 Saudi vision as well. And the first thing that came about us is to really understand that we first must build the AI digital infrastructure that is needed. Something that is really, really critical for our mission to democratize AI and its usage and deliver the benefits to both societies and businesses. And the second big thing is really important and to the heart, and for me personally, really to see the localization of content. I have really been extremely, extremely shocked of what I saw in Saudi Arabia. The level of knowledge and the level of education that exists here really surprised me. I mean, this is the first time I lived in this region in a long time. And especially around seeing the new generation and their ability to really embrace this new technology, I was extremely happy to see that we have a great foundation to build upon. So local knowledge development, local IP, local product development, and that should all help into the aid of driving the digital strategy in the kingdom. And so when you look at AI, I think you look at it from 2 points of view. One, people would say, well, look, it's a pessimistic view and the world is going to collapse and we're going to lose all the jobs. Or you could look at it from the other point of view, which is what I highlighted earlier, we as human beings, being inquisitive, being innovative, driving new discovery of new areas of opportunities where we could find value and coexistence with this new platform. So think about the things that comes to my top of mind. If you have kids today and they're going to school, how we teach our kids today is you have in most places across the world, you see that education is one to many. So in sometimes, just because of the number of students to a teacher does not allow the teacher to deliver on personalization of content to the student. The teacher is able now with new AI platform to really start to think about the concept of personalization. An AI that really understands a student's behavior, personality, strengths, weaknesses to deliver their likes. I think this is a great thing. Think about medicine. Today most of what we go through is very reactive. I get a symptom, then I go to the doctor. What happens if AI aids us to change this paradigm, to go from reactive approach to predictable approach by early diagnostics? I think that's also a really good thing. And top of mind of the world, not just locally here, is sustainability. And AI could help you really utilize your resources in a much, much more effective way. So in general, my point of view, AI is not a tool. That's really important. AI now, to me, is your digital companion. And it is here now, and it's going to evolve. And our ability to coexist with it is important. But it's also really important to understand the ethics and the development that we have to do and the responsibility that we need to take, all of us as private citizens, government, and enterprises, to ensure that this new idea is evolving in a way that delivers on the promise. So I'm really optimistic about the future that we're in. We're in early days, but it's definitely going to be a game changer on bringing advancements to society and a lot of help that it will do in both the business side as well as the consumer side.
Interesting note on medicine, where we could potentially one day live in a world where you take a pre-medicine so that you don't get the symptoms. That's something that could potentially be a reality?
It's 100%. I mean, just think about it. I'll give you very simple. If today, if you look at when we talk about the digital divide, we have many places in the world today that don't have the basic of the basic of the basic, which is access to doctors. Now, what happens now if you really have a very predictable way where you could just use your computer or your phone camera to predict, let's say, a skin condition, to analyze it, and then automatically a prescription of medicine is delivered to you before a problem could happen. So I think the advancements on discovery around medicine is already here and today. And you'll see a huge opportunity now to address health and wellness. And this is one particular domain I'm really, really excited about.
Yeah. Interesting. Mr. Bilal, you can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the ITU is a specialized agency of the United Nations responsible for coordinating global telecom and ICT standards. Why is regulation preferable or even necessary, would you say, when it comes to ensuring AI in the greater good of humanity, or for the greater good of humanity?
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you and for the question. As you said, the ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies. We have just celebrated last Friday 159 years of existence. The ITU was set up to really set up international standards for telegraph, and has evolved in its mandate and mission to the artificial intelligence of today. Artificial intelligence governance and guardrails cannot be really implemented without international standards. The governance and guardrails are usually policy directions on how AI could safely be used. And in order to implement that, we need international standards. So since 2017, the ITU has embarked on a new platform called the AI for Good Summit. And way before ChatGPT made AI a topic of discussion, a household topic of discussion. And our view was that AI is an incredible tool in terms of accelerating the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And in doing so, we brought a unique platform of dialogue among the private sector, the governments, the universities, civil society, really all the stakeholders around the AI conversation, to determine what are the areas where AI could help the most in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. To be more concrete, and I pick up on the example that Tarek Amin just gave on the use of AI for health. In 2018, we launched a collaboration with the World Health Organization, WHO, which is another UN agency here in Geneva, on the use of artificial intelligence for health. And a focus group composed of doctors and technology experts have been working since then, since 2018, on benchmarking those applications that Tarek mentioned in terms of being able to diagnose certain diseases using your smartphone. That focus group developed 35 technical reports and specifications on AI, the ethical use of AI for healthcare, on the regulation of using AI for healthcare, on a number of use cases, various diseases where AI could be used in health. And then the bulk of the work, being a technical agency, is a number of standards on the data acquisition when it comes to AI for health, on the data management and processing, on the use of test data to benchmark the algorithms. And that process was quite inclusive and quite broad internationally to ensure that those solutions are not only applicable in one developed country of the world, but is really applicable in many developing countries around the world. So that's a concrete example of how standards help in the implementation of AI within a regulatory framework, a framework of ethical use of data and acquisition of data, and with a framework that really ensures that the applications of AI for health are benchmarked according to the medical regulation and the medical guidelines and the medical standards of practicing doctors.
Thank you for that, Bilal. Nabil, if I can go back to you and bringing things back locally for a second. The roadmap for the country's agenda for data and AI, the immediate term has been focused on addressing Saudi Arabia's urgent needs in line with Vision 2030. Can you tell us what those urgent needs look like and how have they been addressed to benefit both general and digital well-being?
I think the main direction of the government on that part was to focus on what is the essence of the problems and challenges that we face and how we gonna use the AI or any emerging technology in order to move forward about resolving that part. I think healthcare is one of the top priority part because this will have the implication of reducing the waiting line of the patients to seeing the appointment of the doctors and going even more further about how to assure that we have the accessibility for the specialist on the patient in different city without getting the hassles of the travel. As well, education is very important part because now I can put it in this way, AI is coming and students and the young generation are the early people that go use this technology heavily. So we need to intervene in that part to assure that we have, I'm not saying that put controls, but at least make sure that the deviation of this technology is going to the secure and safety for the student at the end of the day. So education is a very important part on that part. Digital government services, which is the main pillar that we need to focus on going forward. And let me give an example. We are working on something called the whole of government, where we are dreaming to reach to the point that we have one super app that all government services that you will have there. And that super app, it will be customized based on each individual about how he used that application and what type of the services that he's gonna use at that part. But not only that, we need also to have the focus about what will be, let's say, and we were just talking in the backstage about that with Tariq about what type of risk intelligence that we could have in place. So for instance, we could have some incident geopolitically, and that geopolitical incident in our region could have a ripple effect on many services that we have within the government, not only digital government, even the private sector. So how we make sure that we use the AI to give us that early indicators by analyzing that trends and where we are going to manage about that risk proactively. So we are moving from detection phase up to proactively, where we proactively manage that risk about that part. Yeah. I think the transport and logistics, there is a huge opportunity, and it's enabling the industrial sector, because industrial sector definitely, they are talking about minimizing the cost in order to have the competitional prices about the local products. You cannot do that if you don't have a proper data source in place and a proper algorithm that know what is the problem that you need to solve and how to assure that all those capabilities are in place to give you a proper data analysis that support your decision making. Definitely, you cannot do it by manual because there is a mass number of data, a mass number of changes and uncertainties that you need to manage in place. But sometimes small tweaks here and there, it can make a big bang for you in terms of the final product that you are giving. So AI is an area that we can focus in the transport and logistics, and this is one of the main pillars of Vision 2030, where His Excellency is focusing mainly on building that part and to make sure that Saudi Arabia is becoming the heart of the logistics of the whole region, connecting Asia with Europe and Africa and the rest of the world.
On the subject of transportation, and as a testament to how advanced Saudi Arabia is and all the efforts that have gone into the digitalization, I was watching a podcast where 2 or 3 American gentlemen were like, by the way, in Saudi Arabia, when you get a traffic fine or a speeding ticket, you get a message on your phone. They couldn't believe it. The guy who was telling the story, the other 2, they were like, impossible, you get a message on your phone. But I think that shows you how far along we are, that even in the US, I think speeding tickets are still paper, where if we go too fast within seconds, we get a few messages. How do you, Tariq, react to the efforts, the investments that the country is putting towards AI? With what you do, obviously, bridging the digital divide gap is something that is very high on your priorities list. So when you hear the government investing and the efforts that go into it, how does that make you feel in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to give you some perspective, so in my previous roles, I had the opportunity to meet quite a bit of government officials. And one thing that was really captivating for me here is the linkage between what I saw with ministers and ministries and society is just incredible. I mean, just think about when I talk about, I read about what is called Vision 2030 before coming here. But when the whole society is involved into a grand objective that really has a significant impact on improving life, diversifying the economy, improving society, and advancing the kingdom cause, it is very, very clear that the government is thinking in the right direction. And it was important, as I was thinking about Aramco Digital, there is no logic to build the company without understanding the intersection between what is happening also in the government sector. It's really, really important that there is a clear alignment, clear objective. It makes life a lot easier to execute on the mission in hand. And so when you talk to my team, I said, we have really 3 main objectives we have to do and we have to address. So we all get really maybe captivated in the early days when OpenAI did ChatGPT. But if you break this down to say what is needed for AI to really function and work and for innovation to come on top of the platforms. So the first thing that we're focused on in Aramco Digital, I call it building the AI digital infrastructure. So allow me to elaborate on this because it's really important. If you go back in history and you talk about the impact that cloud computing had on enterprises, across the world there is a significant implications to the advancements of enterprises, application, and innovation when cloud computing came in. Now, AI needs these high performance compute. And I'm sure all of you have heard about these advanced chipsets requirement that is needed to run AI workload, regardless whether it is OpenAI or other large language models. So in the kingdom, the focus is we need to build a green, carbon footprint-free data centers. You need to start with this, because without having this infrastructure, that desire to advance in AI will not happen. Once you build a data center with the right power capacity, the right sustainability, you need to make sure they have state-of-the-art connectivity. And so once you have that, you need to ensure that you have these advanced chipsets that are needed to offer to society in the kingdom what we call AI infrastructure as a service. So to give access to anybody that wants to build application, develop local content to ignite this transformation or evolution. So this is the infrastructure that we cannot ignore. So without this being in place and without being here, I would say we'll be really challenged to see how AI could take off at the local level here. I'm talking about entrepreneurship, enterprises, government, to achieve their objective. Now, the good news is there is no doubt what I see at a large kingdom initiative is to push this agenda. At Aramco Digital, we have 100% alignment with this approach. Once you have this infrastructure, then the second cool thing happens, developing the intelligence layer. I'll tell you an example. We were talking about it that I have not really yet announced officially, but I'll tell you today what we're excited about. So for the last 9 months, within Saudi Arabia, our team has been creating a new operating system. This is really unique. A new, the world have seen what is called large language model. We want to define a new large language user interface. So a platform we call NeuroOS, where a prompt is the only thing you need to access your enterprise application. Anything that comes on your mind, regardless whether you use it for HR, finance, legal, operation, managing your infrastructure. We are very, very excited to see this. And we were only be able to do this largely because we have invested very heavily on the underlying infrastructure, our cloud environment, and the partnership that we have done, not just with local company, but global hyperscalers as well. So NeuroOS, I think, will be a game changer in our view because I really love the idea that was locally developed. That is really a big departure in thinking. It is the new enterprise, new generation operating system, AI-powered with action models that links to all the underlying systems of record. And then last but not least, this is where we say as a society and enterprises is really enabling the market. Once you have all these 3 layers built, I think you're going to see a significant advancements on a bigger world where we truly have democratized AI. And then you created a bit of equality. So when we talk about digital divide, if you don't have these layers available, I think we will always be struggling in certain countries where they have access to these advanced chipsets and certain countries that cannot yet obtain these chipsets. That will always be, to me, the hindering to see the democratization of AI. And hopefully that's something that I see in Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of great effort to address the AI digital infrastructure requirement.
It's really good to hear that investments have been made on both the front end and the back end.
Correct.
To ensure an infrastructure that can rival any market in the world. Mr. Bilal, a question about the pace of AI development and how it can make things tricky for regulators. Generally speaking, how do we develop equitable regulation at the rate that we are progressing, but at the same time not affecting or hindering innovation?
Great question. I think the European Act that was published just a few weeks ago, is an example of an act that is trying to govern without necessarily hindering innovation. It was based on, it's a risk-based approach. So the European Union Act was really trying to identify the areas that are unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, minimal risk, so that the regulation and the governance could be geared towards those areas of high risk, and then leaving some of the lower risk areas for more broader open innovation. That's generally a track that a trend that we see in many other areas of the world, in the US, in China, in India and others. And what we are trying to do to really harmonize this regulatory space and allow it to keep pace with technology innovation. And next week at our AI for Good Summit, we're hosting the first AI Governance Day in the world with about 60, 70 ministers, regulators, C-level of companies, UN agencies, civil society, for a morning session where there will be roundtables of discussion around the governance of AI, the regulation of AI, and how technology is rapidly changing, and how the regulation needs to allow for that rapid pace of movement on technology. And then we'll have in the afternoon a readout of the AI Governance Day on the 29th to the general public, to the media, etc. Those are really some of the efforts that we are trying to have here in the ITU. And of course, throughout the process of standards development, there is a lot of discussion and development of glossary of terms, because AI is inevitably interdisciplinary. So, for example, we talked today about AI for health. It brings doctors and technologists. There is the application of AI for agriculture, where we're using IoT and data to optimize the crop production. There is the use of AI for natural disaster management and hazards management. AI for transportation. In fact, last time I was in Dammam was in December, attending the 6th International Traffic Safety Conference, and it was about the use of AI for road safety. So all of these AI uses in different verticals need first a definition of a standard terms so that we all speak of the same topic in the same definition. Then an elaboration of some use cases of those technology of AI in that domain, and then specific standards and regulation to allow us to move forward in a safer manner, if you will, towards using of AI generally.
Thank you for that. We have just under 2 minutes left. Nabil, I wanted to ask you about an amazing initiative that you're currently working on that will enable more than 25,000 women in emerging markets to join the field of data and AI over the next 5 years. Can you, sorry we left it till the end, but can you touch on a little bit on how that's coming along?
I think the main pillar of, or the enabler for Vision 2030 is the inclusions for the whole task force that we have in place. I think they were a big partner on that development, and if you see if you go, last month I went to some universities and I see an amazing work. Some brilliant ladies, they do some excellent work about some application that can be used in AI, and now the government are adopting some of those solutions and try to leverage that level to that part. I think the level of commitment and passion that we are seeing, even about all the initiatives that we did, we need to do more, because still there we have a vast talent that we have a place within the country. And I think that we have a huge opportunity, and it's like golden mine, that every time that we have surprises, and positive surprises actually, about what are this young generation that they can do. And even if you see the government apps, you see the number of tweaks make the experience of the individual about that application much better. People behind it are young ladies and young guys doing that part and that work. I think we all work in the same goal and the same objective. We need to do more and more. All what we did, still great, but we need to invest more on that part, because this is the real oil that we need to have in place, and this is the real investment that we need in place. And inshallah, with the partnership with the private sector, we will be able to reach to that point, inshallah, in the future.
Inshallah, inshallah. Any closing comments before we break for lunch?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, great insight and an amazing day to talk about an important topic. Maybe the one last area that I'll leave you with, I think we should be really excited what tomorrow looks like. We shouldn't worry about what's going to happen. We will always be inquisitive. We will always find a way to adapt to the evolving technology introduction of AI. However, at the same time, I think we really need to be cautious about the evolution of AI, and not to forget that we have to consider the ethics that comes with AI and the biases that the data sets could present. So while I'm optimistic, but I think we all have responsibility to ensure that this technology evolve in the appropriate guardrails and inclusion across the world.
Very well said. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Thank you very much, Bilal, who joined us by Zoom. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our panel.
Thank you very much.